Today, we will be explaining everything about Marie Curie, her history, her dangerous discoveries, and her lasting scientific legacy. Relax, because this will take a while.
It is the evening of November 7, 1867. The air over Warsaw is cold. The temperature is near the freezing point. Wet snow falls onto the cobblestone surface of Freda Street. The snow melts as it touches the ground, forming dark puddles of water between the gray stones. Iron rimmed wooden wheels of passing carriages splash the water onto the brick sidewalks. Draft horses exhale clouds of white vapor into the freezing air. Their iron shod hooves strike the wet stones. The sharp clacks echo down the narrow street. Tall iron gas lamps stand at the intersections. The gas hisses continuously as it burns. The flames project flat yellow light onto the wet brick facades of the multi-story buildings. Wood smoke, burning coal dust, and the smell of wet animal wool scent the damp winter air. On this street stands a stone building. Inside, on the second floor, a wood fire burns inside a cast iron stove. The thick metal of the stove radiates heat into a small, low ceilinged bedroom. The room smells of boiling water, lye soap, and clean linen cloth. Bronisława Skłodowska rests in a narrow wooden bed. Her face shines with a layer of sweat. A midwife in a dark cotton dress stands beside the bed. She wipes Bronisława's forehead with a damp cloth. The midwife holds a newborn infant. The infant is wrapped tightly in thick gray wool. The baby is a girl. Her parents name her Maria Salomea Skłodowska. She is the fifth child born into the family. Władysław Skłodowski stands beside the wooden bed. He wears a dark wool suit with a high, stiff collar. He looks down at his wife and his new daughter. Władysław is a teacher. He instructs secondary school students in the subjects of physics and mathematics. Bronisława is also an educator. She operates a private boarding school for girls. This school occupies the lower floor of this exact building. During the daylight hours, the sounds of teenage girls shifting in wooden chairs, the clatter of tin spoons in ceramic bowls, and the scratching of chalk on slate boards drift up through the ceiling boards into the family's living quarters. The smell of boiled cabbage and potatoes rises from the kitchens below. Warsaw is the capital city of Congress Poland. The Russian Empire holds administrative and military control over the territory. Outside the apartment window, Russian soldiers wearing heavy green wool coats and carrying long rifles walk along the sidewalks. They carry bayonets attached to the barrels of their rifles. Their heavy leather boots scuff against the bricks. Russian government officials dictate the rules for the schools where Władysław and Bronisława work. Instructors are required to conduct all lessons entirely in the Russian language. Books printed in the Polish language are banned from the classrooms. Russian school inspectors conduct unannounced visits to the schools. They wear dark uniforms with polished brass buttons. They smell of dark tobacco and damp wool. They open classroom doors without knocking. They walk up and down the narrow wooden aisles between the students' desks. They listen closely to the exact words spoken by the teachers and the pupils. Inside the second floor apartment on Freda Street, the Sklodowski family maintains their own routines away from the inspectors. Władysław brings physical objects from his classroom into the home. He places glass beakers, brass weights, and iron magnets onto the wooden kitchen table. He sets up a brass balance scale. He places a 50-gram copper weight on the left metal pan. He pours coarse white salt into the right pan until the brass needle points to the dead center. His older children stand around the table. They watch the metal needle swing and settle. He shows them how to measure mass, how to calculate volume. and how to record the numbers on sheets of paper using graphite pencils. In the late evenings, after the sun sets and the room grows dark, Władysław lights a thick tallow candle. He places the candle in the center of the wooden table. He pulls a leather bound book from the shelf. The book is printed in Polish. The pages are thick and rough edged. Władysław sits in a wooden armchair. He reads the Polish words aloud. His children sit on the wooden floorboards in front of the cast iron stove. They listen to the sounds of the words. The candle flame flickers in the moving air, casting long shadows on the flat plaster walls. The Skłodowski apartment is small. 7 people now share the enclosed space. Wooden beds line the walls of the sleeping quarters. Heavy wool blankets rest on the mattresses to protect against the winter cold air that flows through the small gaps in the wooden window frames. A large wooden trunk sits in the corner, holding the family's folded clothing. In Władysław's study, a glass fronted wooden cabinet stands against the far wall. The cabinet contains scientific instruments, clear glass tubes, mercury thermometers, a wooden metronome, and a gold leaf electroscope sit on the wooden shelves. Small glass prisms sit next to copper wire coils. The polished brass fixtures on the instruments reflect the low light from the stove. On this night, November 7th, 1867, the total human population on Earth is approximately 1.3 billion people. The newborn infant Maria, breathing the warm air of the bedroom, is exactly one out of those 1.3 billion humans alive. Statistically, her mathematical odds of eventually becoming a 2-time Nobel laureate are exactly zero. No person has ever accomplished this feat. The prize itself does not yet exist. She is a newborn infant, sleeping in a wool blanket in a city patrolled by foreign soldiers. Władysław reaches down and takes the infant Maria from the midwife. He supports her head with his wide hand. He walks slowly out of the warm bedroom and steps into his study. He stops in front of the glass cabinet. The firelight reflects off the curved glass of the barometers and the flat brass plates of the scales. The infant opens her eyes. She blinks in the dim light. Władysław holds the child, looking at the tools of measurement locked behind the glass. In exactly 4 years, this infant will be sitting on the wooden floorboards of this very room, surrounded by these same glass instruments, inspecting the equipment that now rests on the shelves. 4-year-old Maria sits on the bare pine floorboards of her father's study. The year is 1871. Diagonal columns of morning sunlight project across the room from the east-facing window. Thousands of dust particles float upward through the illuminated air. The light hits a collection of scientific instruments resting directly on the wooden floor. Clear glass cylinders, spherical boiling flasks, and curved condensation tubes surround the child. Polished brass weights sit inside a velvet lined wooden box. A gold leaf electroscope stands on a mahogany base. Russian education inspectors ordered the removal of these physical objects from the local secondary school. Władysław Skowski carried them in wooden crates up the stairs to this room. Maria reaches out with her small hand. Her fingertips press against the cold, smooth surface of a glass triangular prism. The glass refracts the sunlight, projecting a small, sharp band of colored light onto the white plaster wall. The heavy wooden carts roll over the cobblestone street outside the window. The iron wheels create a low vibration that travels up through the brick walls and into the floorboards beneath Maria. The room smells of dry paper, floor wax, and the metallic scent of brass polish. Maria holds a thick book bound in brown leather. She sits cross legged on the floor. Her eyes track the black ink letters printed on the rough paper pages. Her lungs draw in air. She pushes the air up through her trachea. Her vocal cords vibrate. She shapes her lips, tongue, and teeth to produce the precise phonetic sounds of the Polish words. She produces hard consonants and rolling vowels. She reads the text fluently. Her older siblings sit on wooden stools around the perimeter of the room. Zofia, the eldest, wears a dark wool dress with long sleeves. Josef, the only brother, wears a cotton shirt with a stiff collar. Bronisława and Helena watch their youngest sister. The family addresses Maria using the vocal sound mania. Władysław stands near the window. He reads a long sequence of rhyming syllables from a printed page. He closes the book. The heavy leather cover makes a dull thud against the paper block. The room falls silent. Maria opens her mouth. She reproduces the exact sequence of syllables. The pitch and rhythm of her voice match the acoustic pressure waves generated by her father seconds earlier. Her biological memory encodes and reproduces audio information at the identical rate of a mechanical recording device. She hears a sequence of 200 spoken words. Within seconds, her vocal cords replicate the exact sound pattern. The biological energy required for this rapid neurological recall derives directly from the bowls of boiled green cabbage, salted pork, and dark rye bread she consumes at the wooden dining table. The family occupies a physical space consisting of two bedrooms, a central living area, and a kitchen. 7 human bodies share this enclosed volume of air. Władysław and Bronisława sleep in the larger bedroom. The 5 children sleep in the remaining spaces. They lie on mattresses stuffed with dried horsehair and straw. The straw crunches and compresses under their body weight. They pull thick wool blankets over their chests to trap their body heat during the cold nights. The two parents earn quantities of copper and silver coins through their daily teaching labor. They carry these metal discs to the street markets. They hand the coins to merchants. The merchants hand them sacks of milled wheat flour, heavy root vegetables, and small cuts of animal muscle and fat. The daily diet consists heavily of dense carbohydrates. In the kitchen, Władysław uses an iron shovel to load black coal into the cast iron stove. He closes the heavy metal door with a loud clank. The coal burns, radiating intense heat into the room. A cast iron pot sits on top of the stove. Boiling water bubbles violently around chopped green cabbage leaves, halved potatoes, and white onions. Steam rises from the pot. The moisture travels through the air and condenses into water droplets on the cold glass, window panes. The household follows a strict sequence of physical movements every morning. Before the sun rises, the temperature inside the apartment drops near the freezing point of water. The 5 children wake in the dark. They throw off the heavy wool blankets. They step out of their beds. Their bare feet press against the cold wooden floorboards. They kneel on the hard floor. The flat pine boards press upward into the skin, connective tissue, and bones of their kneecaps. They hold strings of small wooden beads linked by thin metal wire. Their fingers move methodically, sliding from one bead to the next. The wooden spheres click together. They push air through their mouths to form specific sequences of words. They speak in Latin and Polish. As they exhale, the moisture in their breath condenses in the cold air, forming small white plumes from their mouths. The sound of their overlapping voices creates a low, continuous hum in the room. The scent of burning beeswax candles mixes with the smell of unwashed wool. They complete the physical sequence. They stand up. They put on their thick clothing. In the evenings, they sit on wooden chairs. Władysław opens a book and reads aloud. The children rest their elbows on the table. Their breathing slows. Their eyelids droop under the downward pull of gravity. They exist in a state of biological equilibrium. 7 chests rise and fall with steady intakes of oxygen. 7 human hearts pump red blood through veins and arteries. 7 bodies maintain a core internal temperature of 37 degrees Celsius. Their skin is warm to the touch. The calendar on the wall marks the passage of days. The Earth continues its orbit. The date approaches the winter of 1876. The family sits around the wooden table. 7 ceramic bowls rest on the flat surface. 7 wooden spoons scrape against the fired clay. They swallow their hot food. A specific microscopic organism exists outside this apartment. It is a bacteria named Rickettsia prowazekii. It travels inside the digestive tracts of small insects known as human lice. When these insects pierce human skin to extract blood, the bacteria enter the human bloodstream. The bacteria multiply inside the endothelial cells, causing a biological reaction known as typhus. The front door of the apartment is made of heavy oak. Soon, a boarding student from the lower floor will turn the brass handle. This student will walk up the stairs and cross the threshold. This student will carry the microscopic bacteria into the enclosed air of the apartment. The period of equilibrium will end.
Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the video so far, please remember to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. See you around.
The month is January. The year is 1876. The temperature inside the Skłodowski apartment drops. Frost forms in thick, crystalline patterns on the interior surfaces of the glass massat windspanes. A young female boarding student lies on a narrow wooden bed in the lower floor of the building. Microscopic bacteria named Rickettsia prowazekii multiply rapidly inside the student's bloodstream. Human lice crawl across the cotton bed sheets. The lice consumes the infected blood. The insects travel upstairs. They move across the wooden floorboards. They climb onto the wool blankets covering 8-year-old Maria and her eldest sister, Zofia. Zofia's core body temperature rises to 40 degrees Celsius. She lies flat on her horsehair mattress. Sweat coats the skin of her face and neck. The moisture pools in the hollows of her collarbones. Dark red macules appear on the skin of her chest and spread rapidly down her arms and legs. Her muscles spasm uncontrollably, causing the wooden bed frame to rattle against the plaster wall. Her breathing becomes shallow and rapid. The exhalations smell strongly of acetone and decaying tissue. Maria stands in the doorway of the bedroom. She watches the physical spasms. She listens to the quick, wet sounds of her sister's lungs pulling in air. In late January, Zophia's heart muscle ceases its contractions. Blood stops flowing through her arteries. Her body temperature drops to match the ambient temperature of the cold room. Władysław and 3 other men lift a rectangular pine box. They carry the heavy wooden box down the narrow staircase. The wooden steps groan under their combined weight. They carry the box out into the freezing street. Time progresses. The Earth continues its orbit. The calendar reaches May of 1878. Maria is 10 years old. A different strain of bacteria, Mycobacterium tuberculosis, multiplies inside the lung tissue of her mother, Bronisława. Bronisława lies in the large wooden bed in the main bedroom. The bacteria consume the cellular structure of her lungs, creating physical cavities inside her chest. The biological process produces large quantities of fluid. Bronisława forces air violently up her trachea to expel the liquid. The coughing produces a loud, rhythmic hacking sound that echoes against the bare plaster walls of the apartment. She presses a white cotton handkerchief to her lips. When she pulls the cloth away, Bright red arterial blood and thick yellow mucus stain the white fabric. The metallic smell of blood mixes with the odor of carbolic acid and stale sweat in the enclosed room. Men wearing dark wool suits visit the apartment. They hold cylindrical wooden stethoscopes. They press the flared ends of the wooden tubes directly against Bronisława's chest and back. They press their ears to the opposite ends. They listen to the wet, crackling friction of the damaged lung tissue rubbing together. The medical treatments of the decade involve specific physical actions. The men instruct Władysław to keep the glass windows propped open. Cold outside air flows over the bed. They place heavy wool blankets over Bronisława's shivering body. They apply heated glass cups to the skin of her back to draw blood to the surface. The glass leaves raised dark purple circles on her pale skin. They instruct the family members to sit beside the bed, hold their strings of wooden beads, and repeat specific sequences of Latin words. They provide bowls of hot, salted beef broth. Bronisława swallows small amounts of the brown liquid. The flesh on her arms and face shrinks. Her cheekbones and jawline protrude sharply against her skin. In the year 1878, the Mycobacterium tuberculosis bacteria causes exactly one out of every 7 human deaths across the geographic landmass of Europe. The total mass of human bodies expiring from this specific bacterial infection equals the mortality volume of a large scale, continuous military artillery war. On a day in May 1878, the coughing stops. Bronisława's chest remains flat against the mattress. The air in the room is completely still. Maria alters her daily sequence of physical movements. She leaves the string of wooden beads inside the dark drawer of the wooden table. She keeps her knees straight during the early morning hours. She keeps her lips pressed tightly together. She places heavy textbooks on the flat surface of the wooden table. She pulls a wooden chair close to the edge. She sits on the hard seat. She grips a wooden stratensil enclosing a thin rod of graphite. She presses the sharp tip of the graphite against the coarse texture of the paper. She moves her hand left to right, leaving a trail of dark carbon marks. She copies long columns of mathematical equations. She copies paragraphs of historical text. The friction of the pencil tip makes a continuous rhythmic scratching sound. Maria maintains this physical position for 6, sometimes 8 hours at a time. The skin on the side of her right middle finger develops a thick, hard callus from the constant pressure of the wood. The muscles in her back and neck grow rigid. The calendar turns to June 1883. Maria is 15 years old. She wears a dark blue wool dress with a high, stiff collar. The fabric is heavy and scratches against the skin of her neck. She stands on raised wooden planks at the front of the secondary school assembly hall. Bright summer sunlight streams through the tall glass windows, illuminating the dust motes suspended in the warm air. The air smells of floor wax and the starch from dozens of freshly pressed cotton shirts. A school official, wearing a black suit, approaches her. He holds a solid gold circular medal. He pushes a sharp steel pin through the thick wool fabric on the left side of Maria's chest. He secures the clasp. The heavy gold disc hangs against her ribs. The polished metal reflects the bright sunlight directly into the eyes of the people sitting in the audience. Maria looks down at the rose-cushioned chairs, arranged on the floor below the stage. Władysław sits in a chair in the front row. He wears his dark wool suit. Józef, Helena, and Bronisława sit in the chairs immediately to his right. The flat wooden seat of the chair immediately to his left holds only a folded wool overcoat. Maria steps down from the wooden planks. Her leather shoes make sharp clicking sounds on the floor. She walks down the center aisle toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the hall. She carries the gold medal on her chest. She walks toward the large stone buildings of the university, where heavy iron locks secure the thick wooden doors against female students. The wrought iron gates of the University of Warsaw stand open on Krakowski Przedmieści Street. The iron bars are thick, cylindrical, and coated in black paint. Male students wearing dark wool coats and heavy leather boots walk through the gap between the stone pillars. Their boot heels strike the flat cobblestones, producing sharp, rhythmic clacking sounds. Russian guards stand beside the stone pillars. The guards wear thick green wool uniforms with polished brass buttons. They hold long wooden rifles with steel barrels, long, triangular steel bayonets attached to the ends of the barrels. Maria stands on the brick sidewalk outside the gate. She is 18 years old. She wears a heavy wool dress. The cold air presses against the exposed skin of her face. She looks at the men walking past the guards. If a female body attempts to step between the stone pillars, the guards cross their steel rifles. The physical barrier prevents entry. The university's building inside the courtyard remain entirely inaccessible to her physical form. The Russian government strictly prohibits the enrollment of women. In a different sector of the city, 12 people sit inside a narrow kitchen on the third floor of a brick apartment building. The air inside the room is warm. It smells of boiled cabbage, damp wool coats, and burning oil. Thick brown woven blankets cover the glass windows, blocking the light from reaching the street outside. A single brass oil lamp burns on the center of a wooden table. The yellow flame illuminates the faces of the young men and women. An older man stands at the head of the table. He speaks Polish in a low, quiet voice. The sound waves travel only a short distance across the room. He holds a piece of white chalk. He presses the chalk against a flat, rectangular piece of black slate. The chalk makes a soft, continuous scraping sound as he draws mathematical equations and anatomical diagrams. White chalk dust falls onto the wooden table. Maria sits on a small wooden stool. She holds a piece of coarse paper and a thin graphite pencil. She presses the graphite onto the paper. She writes down the equations. This is the Flying University. The location changes every week. Sometimes they sit in a basement smelling of damp earth. Sometimes they sit in an attic smelling of dry wood and pigeon droppings. Russian police officers patrol the cobblestone streets below these rooms. The officers wear dark blue uniforms. They carry heavy wooden batons hanging from leather belts. If these officers walk up the wooden stairs, break the metal door hinges, and find the slate board covered in Polish writing, they will initiate a specific physical process. The officers will place heavy iron chains around the wrists of the students. They will force the students into wooden train cars. The trains will travel east across the continental landmass to the region of Siberia. The geographic distance from Warsaw to Siberia measures roughly 6,000 kilometers. In the winter months, the ambient temperature in Siberia drops to minus 40 degrees Celsius. The freezing air extracts heat from human bodies. The cold freezes the water inside human skin cells, expanding the ice crystals, rupturing the cell walls, and turning the tissue black and hard. The students leave the apartment one at a time. One student walks down the wooden stairs. The floorboards creak. 3 minutes pass. A second student walks down the stairs. They stagger their departures into the dark street. Inside the Skłodowski apartment on Freta Street, Maria sits at the wooden table. Her sister Bronisława sits across from her. They place a small pile of copper and silver coins on the flat wood. The total mass of the metal coins is small. The cost of train tickets to France and the tuition for medical textbooks at the Sorbonne in Paris requires a much larger mass of metal. Maria and Bronislawa speak to each other in the quiet room. They establish a sequential plan. Maria will pack her clothing into a leather trunk. She will travel to the rural agricultural districts. She will work as a governess. She will instruct the children of wealthy landowners. The landowners will hand her silver coins at the end of each month. She will place the coins inside paper envelopes and send them to Paris. The coins will pay for Bronislawa's medical education. When Bronislawa completes her medical training, she will earn her own coins and send them back to Maria. Maria rides a horse drawn wooden cart out of Warsaw. The heavy wooden wheels sink into the soft, wet mud of the rural roads. The horses pull against their leather harnesses. She arrives at her large stone house surrounded by flat fields of green sugar beets. For the next 6 years, her physical location remains in the countryside. She sits in brightly lit sitting rooms with large glass windows. She points at black ink letters printed on white paper. She teaches young children to pronounce the sounds. She teaches them to add and subtract numbers using wooden blocks. At night, she sits in her small, unheated bedroom on the upper floor of the house. The air is cold. She wraps a thick wool shawl around her shoulders to retain her body heat. She sits at a small wooden desk. She dips a steel pen nib into a glass bottle of black ink. The metal nib scratches across a sheet of paper. She writes letters to her father and her sisters. The ink dries on the paper. She folds the paper. She melts a stick of red wax over a candle flame. The hot wax drips onto the paper fold. She presses a cold metal seal into the soft wax. She places the silver coins she earns into the envelopes. She eats meals of roasted pork and boiled potatoes at the edge of the landowner's long dining tables. The seasons change. The snow melts into mud. The mud dries into dust. The dust turns back to mud. The physical labor of teaching children continues for exactly 72 months. The calendar reaches November 1891. Maria is 24 years old. She stands on the wooden platform of the Warsaw railway station. Steam from a large iron locomotive engine billows into the cold autumn air. The white steam smells of burning coal, sulfur, and hot lubricating oil. The loud hiss of the high pressure valves vibrates against her eardrums. She holds a small, scuffed leather suitcase in her left hand. In her right hand, she carries a small wooden folding stool with a canvas seat. She steps up the metal stairs and walks through the door into the fourth class train carriage. The carriage consists of a long rectangular wooden box. The flat wooden floorboards stretch from wall to wall. The floor is covered in loose yellow straw. The straw smells of dust and dry grass. Maria opens the wooden stool. The metal hinges squeak. She places the four wooden legs onto the floorboards. She sits down on the taut canvas fabric. The heavy iron wheels of the train squeal against the steel tracks. The carriage jerks forward, knocking her shoulders back. The metal couplings bang together with a loud crash. The locomotive burns through tons of black coal, generating the steam pressure that turns the massive steel wheels. The train accelerates westward across the flat European landscape. It carries her physical body toward the border of France, moving her inexorably toward a small, unheated attic room on the left bank of Paris. It is November of 1891. Low, dense gray clouds hang over the city of Paris. Rainwater runs down the slanted zinc roofs of the buildings. The water pours from the mouths of cast iron drain pipes onto the paved cobblestone streets below. The iron rimmed wheels of horse drawn omnibuses grind against the wet, hard stones. The distinct smell of roasted chestnuts, damp animal wool, and raw sewage rises from the gutters into the cold air. A young woman walks down the Rue de la Harpe on the left bank. She registers her name at the Sorbonne University using the French spelling Marie. She stops at a narrow, tall wooden door. She inserts a heavy brass key into the iron lock. She turns the metal key. The internal tumblers click. She pushes the door open. The iron hinges squeak. She steps into a dark stairwell. She places the flat sole of her leather shoe on the first wooden step. She shifts her body weight upward. She repeats this physical motion continuously. She climbs 6 complete flights of stairs. Dust motes float in the dim light of the narrow shaft. Her heart rate elevates. Her lungs expand and contract, pulling in the cool, damp air of the stairwell. She reaches the top floor under the roofline. The ceiling of her room slopes downward at a sharp angle, following the exterior pitch of the zinc roof. She enters her living quarters. The enclosed space contains exactly 3 pieces of furniture. A narrow wooden bed frame with a thin, flat mattress sits against the plaster wall. A single wooden chair stands next to a small, square wooden table. A white porcelain wash basin rests directly on the wooden floorboards. A small metal coal stove sits in the corner. The interior of the stove is empty. The iron casing is cold to the touch. During the winter months, the air temperature inside the attic drops to match the ambient temperature of the street outside. The wind pushes through the small gaps between the window frame and the brick wall, whistling as it moves. The liquid water inside the porcelain wash basin turns into solid ice overnight. Marie places her heavy wool dresses, her thick wool sweaters, and her dark winter overcoat onto her body. She layers the heavy fabrics over her skin to trap the thermal energy radiating from her flesh. She sits on the hard wooden chair. She strikes a sulfur match. She lights the wick of a single brass oil lamp. The braided cotton wick absorbs the liquid oil. The yellow flame produces a small circle of illumination on the table, and a thin, continuous trail of black smoke. The room smells of burning paraffin wax, old dust, and cold dampness. She places a heavy physics textbook on the flat wooden table. The pages contain black ink pressed onto white paper. The text consists entirely of the French language. Marie looks at the geometric shapes of the letters. She translates the visual symbols into Polish vocabulary inside her brain. She grips a wooden pencil in her right hand. She writes mathematical formulas on blank sheets of paper. The graphite tip grinds against the coarse grain of the paper, making a quiet, repetitive scratching sound. Her daily food consumption consists of specific, low cost physical items. She walks down the 6 flights of stairs to the street market. She exchanges small copper coins for a long loaf of hard crust bread. She carries the bread back up the wooden stairs. She uses a sharp steel knife to cut thick slices. She spreads a thin layer of salted yellow butter across the porous surface of the bread. She boils water over a small brass alcohol lamp. She pours the boiling water over dried black tea leaves sitting in a ceramic cup. The dark brown liquid warms the tissue of her throat and esophagus as she swallows. On rare occasions, she purchases a single white egg. She drops the egg into the boiling water. The thermal energy denatures the proteins inside the calcium carbonate shell, turning the clear liquid into solid white matter. She consumes the egg, the bread, and the tea. Her total daily caloric intake equals approximately 250 kilocalories. This precise amount of biological energy matches the daily dietary requirement of a small domestic house cat. Marie operates her body on this low volume of food while walking several kilometers across the city every day and processing complex calculus problems. She walks to university. She enters a large, cavernous lecture hall. Rows of long wooden benches rise in a steep semicircle toward the back wall. Hundreds of French students sit on the benches. They wear dark wool coats and stiff white collars. The professor stands at the front of the room. He speaks rapidly. The sound waves carry the French vocabulary across the open air. The French students process the auditory information instantly. Their ears have absorbed these specific sound combinations since their birth. Marie sits on the hard wooden bench. She concentrates entirely on the auditory signals hitting her eardrums. She forces her brain to decode the rapid sequence of foreign vowels and consonants. One afternoon, Marie sits in the lecture hall. Her blood sugar levels drop below the physical threshold required to maintain normal biological function. Her heart rate slows. The blood pressure in her arteries decreases. The flow of oxygenated blood to her brain diminishes. Her visual field narrows and turns completely black. The skeletal muscles in her neck and back relax completely. Gravity pulls her physical mass downward. She falls from the wooden bench. Her shoulder and hip strike the hard wooden floorboards with a loud, heavy thud. Other students stand up. They lift her arms and shoulders. They carry her out of the hall. They place pieces of cooked meat and bread into her hands. She chews and swallows the food. The proteins and carbohydrates enter her digestive system. Her blood sugar rises. Her vision returns to the physical environment. She walks back to the lecture hall. The calendar advances to the summer of 1893. She sits at a wooden desk in a large, hot examination room. Sunlight beats against the glass windows. She dips a steel pen nib into a glass bottle of black ink. She answers the physics examination questions. The examiners collect the papers. They calculate the numerical scores. Marie's paper rears the highest numerical score out of the entire graduating class. The following year, in 1894, she completes the mathematics examination. She receives the second highest numerical score. The Society for the Encouragement of National Industry approaches her. They require quantitative data regarding the magnetic properties of various steel alloys. They hand her a small canvas bag containing metal coins to fund the physical labor. Marie enters a university laboratory. The room smells of ozone and acidic chemical solutions. She lifts heavy, rectangular blocks of gray steel. The rough metal presses red indentations into the skin of her palms. She sets the heavy blocks on flat wooden tables. She spools long, thin strands of copper wire around the steel blocks. She connects the ends of the copper wire to large, liquid filled glass batteries. Small blue electrical sparks snap at the connection points. She uses delicate brass instruments to measure the invisible magnetic pull generated by the electrical currents. The physical dimensions of the laboratory room are small. The heavy steel blocks cover the entire surface of the wooden tables. The spools of copper wire tangle on the floorboards. Marie requires a larger volume of empty space to arrange her metal equipment. She speaks to a Polish physicist visiting the city. The sound waves carry her request for a larger room. The physicist processes the auditory information. He nods his head up and down. He provides her with a specific geographic location. He points his hand toward the School of Industrial Physics and Chemistry. He instructs her to locate a specific 35-year-old French male who studies magnetism. and possesses large laboratory tables. Marie gathers her paper notebooks, places them under her arm, and walks out of the building. The calendar marks the spring of 1894. Marie pushes open the heavy oak door of the School of Industrial Physics and Chemistry in Paris. The oiled brass hinges glide smoothly. She steps onto the tiled floor. The air inside the corridor smells of sulfur dioxide, heated copper wire, and pine sawdust. She walks down the hallway. Her hard leather shoe soles strike the ceramic tiles, producing sharp, rhythmic echoes. She enters a laboratory room. A man stands at a long wooden table. He is 35 years old. His physical height exceeds the average vertical measurement for French males of the era. He wears a dark gray wool jacket. Fine white chalk dust coats the right sleeve of the fabric. This is Pierre Curie. Pierre holds a pair of narrow steel tweezers. He uses the metal tips to carefully position a thin, translucent slice of quartz crystal onto a brass mounting plate. He focuses his visual attention entirely on the precise alignment of the crystalline lattice. A piece of crusty brown bread and a wedge of yellow cheese sit on a ceramic plate at the far end of the wooden table. The food remains undisturbed. Pierre operates his physical body for 12 consecutive hours without consuming carbohydrates or proteins. He continues to adjust the quartz slice, measuring the tiny electrical charge generated by applying physical pressure to the crystal structure. Marie approaches the wooden table. She pushes air up through her vocal cords. The sound waves of her voice travel through the air of the laboratory. Pierre turns his head. The light from the large glass window illuminates his face. He listens to the specific sinks of French vocabulary spoken with the phonetic inflections of the Polish language. She requests a flat wooden surface to place her heavy steel blocks and copper wire spools for her magnetic alloy measurements. Pierre extends his arm and points his hand to an empty section of the laboratory bench. They stand next to each other. They speak about the physical properties of metal alloys, the mathematical equations governing magnetic fields, and the geometric structures of crystals. They extract graphite pencils from their wool pockets. They press the graphite onto coarse paper. They draw geometric diagrams and exchange the sheets of paper. They observe the identical sequences of logic of represented in the gray carbon lines. The Earth completes another partial orbit around the Sun. The date is July 25, 1895. Marie and Pierre walk into a municipal building in the city of Paris. The building contains administrative offices for registering demographic events. The air inside the room smells of floor wax and old paper. They approach a large oak desk. A government official sits behind the desk wearing a black wool suit. Marie wears a newly constructed dress. The garment consists of thick, dark blue wool. She exchanged a specific quantity of metal coins for this exact fabric and tailoring. The dark blue dye absorbs light. The heavy wool weave resists friction and tearing. She selected this specific garment to wear over her skin during the civil marriage ceremony and subsequently to wear during her daily physical labor in the laboratory. The dark blue color conceals the black stains of spilled chemical acids, machine oil, and graphite dust. The government official slides a large rectangular sheet of paper across the flat wooden desk. Marie picks up a steel pen. She dips the metal nib into a glass bottle of black iron gall ink. She presses the wet steel against the paper. She traces the letters of her name. Pierre takes the pen. He repeats the physical action. The wet ink absorbs into the paper fibers and dries. The municipal official has a brass stamp onto a pad of wet red ink. He presses the heavy size stamp onto the paper. The civil marriage contract becomes a physical reality. Marie and Pierre exit the building. They carry a leather pouch containing silver coins to a mechanical workshop. They hand the coins to the shop owner. They roll two bicycles out onto the cobblestone street. The bicycles consist of hollow steel tubes welded together into diamond shaped frames. Thick black rubber tires encircle tensioned steel wire spokes. Leather saddles sit on top of adjustable steel posts. They leave the paved streets of Paris. They travel onto dirt roads, cutting through open agricultural fields in the French countryside. They sit on the leather saddles. They press the soles of their shoes against the flat wooden pedals. They push their leg muscles downward in alternating sequences. The pedals turn a steel toothed gear. A metal chain transfers the kinetic energy to the rear wheel. The rubber tires roll over the dry dirt, crushing small stones and dry grass stems. The summer sun radiates thermal energy down through the atmosphere. The ultraviolet light strikes the exposed skin of their faces, necks, and hands. Sweat forms on their foreheads. The moving air evaporates the sweat, lowering the temperature of their epidermal tissue. They ride the steel machines for entire days, stopping only to consume bread and water. They return to the city. They transport their physical possessions into an apartment on the Rue de la Glacière. The enclosed space contains bare wooden floorboards, white plaster walls, a square wooden table, and two wooden chairs. They carry the two steel bicycles up the stairs. They lean the rubber tires against the flat plaster wall in the main living area. The combined monetary contribution provided to Marie and Pierre by their respective educational institutions for 12 months of labor exactly equals the total mass of coins required to maintain occupancy of this specific physical enclosure for the same duration. They possess the two bicycles, the wooden furniture, their clothing, and their scientific notebooks. The calendar advances to September 1897. Marie lies flat on the mattress in the bedroom of the apartment. Her uterine muscles contract violently. The biological process of childbirth forces a human infant out of her physical body. The infant pulls atmospheric air into its lungs and expels the air over its vocal cords, producing loud, high pitched acoustic waves. They name the female infant Iraean. Marie holds the infant against her chest. The infant's mouth attaches to Marie's breast. The infant extracts liquid milk from the mammary glands to fuel its cellular growth. A short time later, Marie returns to the laboratory room at the School of Industrial Physics and Chemistry. She requires a new, unmeasured physical phenomenon to investigate for a doctoral thesis. She sits at the wooden table. She places a recently printed scientific journal on the flat surface. The rough paper smells of fresh black ink. She reads an article written by a French physicist named Henri Becquerel. The printed text describes a specific chemical compound containing the heavy metal element uranium. Becquerel placed the solid uranium salt on top of a flat glass photographic plate. He wrapped the glass plate in thick, opaque black paper. He stored the objects inside a dark wooden drawer. When he applied chemical developers to the photographic plate, the glass showed distinct dark exposure marks. The uranium salt emitted an invisible form of physical energy. The energy traveled directly through the solid black paper and reacted with the silver halide chemicals on the glass plate. The scientific community currently focuses its measuring instruments on the high contrast skeletal images produced by cathode ray tubes. The invisible energy emitted by the uranium salts remains unmeasured and largely unexamined. Marie places her hands on the heavy physics texts. She prepares to align Pierre's delicate brass electrometers to capture the exact measurements of these continuous emissions. A flat glass plate rests on a wooden table. A thick sheet of black paper wraps entirely around the glass. A pile of yellow uranium salt sits directly on top of the black paper. Henri Becquerel places these physical objects inside a dark wooden drawer. He closes the drawer. Later, he removes the glass plate. He applies a liquid chemical developer to the glass surface. A dark, opaque mark appears on the transparent glass, exactly beneath the location of the yellow salt. The solid uranium emits physical energy. The energy passes through the dense fibers of the black paper. The energy alters the silver compounds on the glass plate. Marie stands in a ground floor storage room at the School of Industrial Physics and Chemistry. The air temperature is 10 degrees Celsius. The walls consist of unpainted, rough brick. The enclosed air smells of wet soil, brass polish, and machine oil. She places a sample of uranium on a circular brass plate, resting on a wooden table. Beside the brass plate sits a complex mechanical measuring device. The device consists of polished brass cylinders, thin copper wires, a suspended metal needle, and a specific cut of clear quartz crystal. Pierre Curie and his brother Jacques constructed this device years earlier. They cut the quartz crystal along a precise geometric axis. A human hand, applying physical pressure to this specific cut of quartz, generates a measurable electrical charge. The device is a piezoelectric quartz electrometer. It measures minute electrical currents traveling through the open air. The energy emitted by the uranium travels upward from the brass plate. The energy collides with the nitrogen and oxygen molecules suspended in the air. The physical collisions strip electrons from the gas molecules. This process creates a weak electrical current in the empty space above the metal plate. The electrometer detects this current. A thin metal needle inside the device swings across a printed numerical scale. The brass needle suspended inside the electrometer responds to microscopic changes in air pressure and temperature. Marie steps across the wooden floorboards. The forward movement of her heavy wool skirt displaces the air in the room. The air current strikes the electrometer. The metal needle swings off the numerical scale. The air friction ruins the measurement. Marie alters her physical movements. She stands perfectly still. She lowers the volume of air entering her lungs. She inhales and exhales in shallow, slow, measured rhythms. She waits for the air currents in the room to settle completely. She extends her right arm at a low speed. She presses her thumb and index finger against a small metal dial on the electrometer. She applies physical pressure to the quartz crystal to exactly balance the electrical current generated by the uranium. She reads the black number printed on the scale. She records the number in her paper notebook with a graphite pencil. She systematically alters the physical environment of the uranium. She places a glass beaker of uranium salt over a burning gas flame. The flame transfers thermal energy to the salt. The temperature of the salt increases by 100 degrees Celsius. She measures the electrical current. The electrometer needle points to the exact same number. She places the uranium salt inside a thick metal box packed with ice. She drops the temperature to the freezing point of water. She measures the current. The needle points to the exact same number. She carries the uranium out into the cobblestone courtyard. She exposes the salt to direct solar radiation. The needle remains constant. She places the uranium in a dark cabinet. The needle remains constant. She pours highly corrosive liquid acid over the uranium. The metal dissolves into a wet, green liquid. She measures the liquid. The needle points to the exact same number. The energy emission remains identical, regardless of the material's chemical state. The emission remains identical at high and low temperatures. The emission remains identical in bright sunlight and total darkness. The single physical metric controlling the position of the electrometer needle is the total mass of the uranium present on the brass plate. A 2-gram piece of uranium moves the needle twice as far as a 1-gram piece of uranium. The energy generates continuously from within the material itself. The energy originates entirely independent of chemical reactions. The radiation projects directly out from the dense center of the individual heavy metal atoms. The atoms themselves release the rays. Marie dips her steel pen into a glass bottle of black ink. She presses the wet nib against the coarse paper of her notebook. She writes a specific sequence of letters to classify this physical behavior. She spells the French word radioactivity. Marie finishes testing the uranium samples. She opens the wooden storage cabinets lining the brick walls of the laboratory. The wooden shelves hold hundreds of glass jars and wooden boxes. These containers hold different mineral samples extracted from the Earth's crust. She plans to place every available mineral on the circular brass plate. She tests a sample of thorium. The electrometer needle swings across the scale. The thorium emits the same continuous energy. She reaches into a heavy wooden crate resting on the floor. She pulls out a large, irregular chunk of dark brown ore. The rock is called pitchblende. Miners extracted this specific rock from a deep underground shaft in the Bohemian forest. The rock possesses a high physical density. The surface is rough and absorbs the light in the room. She places the heavy black rock onto the circular brass plate. She looks at the electrometer. The thin metal needles swings rapidly across the printed numbers. The distance the needle travels exceeds the measurement recorded for pure uranium by a factor of 4. Marie stands at the wooden laboratory table. She holds a small glass jar containing a gray metallic powder. The powder consists of the element thorium. She pours a small pile of the gray powder onto the circular brass plate. She measures the electrical current in the air above the plate. The thin brass needle of the piezoelectric quartz electrometer swings rapidly across the printed numerical scale. The thorium emits the exact same continuous physical energy as the uranium. She records the numerical data with her graphite pencil on the coarse paper. She reaches into a heavy wooden crate resting on the ceramic floor tiles. She pulls out a large, irregular chunk of dark brown ore. The rock is pitchblende. She places the heavy black rock onto the circular brass plate. Pierre Curie stands beside her. He bends his long torso downward. He positions his eyes level with the printed numerical scale of the electrometer. He watches the brass needle hold its steady position. The pitchblende rock contains a specific, measurable percentage of uranium. The exact quantity of uranium present in the sample possesses a specific, mathematically defined limit of energy emission. The current measurement exceeds that exact physical limit by a factor of 4. The uranium accounts for exactly 1/4 of the electrical current displacing the brass needle. The remaining 3/4 of the electrical current originate from an additional physical substance embedded deep within the dense mineral structure of the rock. This specific substance constitutes a completely new physical element. Pierre stands up. His leather shoes scrape against the ceramic tiles. He turns his head and looks at his own wooden workbench on the opposite side of the room. He walks toward the bench. He looks at the clear quartz crystals he spent the previous decade cutting and measuring. He picks up a square piece of heavy gray canvas. He lifts his arms and lowers the canvas directly over the crystals and the delicate steel tweezers. The thick fabric settles over the equipment covering the tools from the falling dust. He walks back to the wooden table, holding the pitch blende. He picks up a graphite pencil. He stands next to Marie. He begins recording a new sequence of numerical data on the course paper. The physical extraction of the newly discovered element requires a large processing area. The director of the School of Industrial Physics and Chemistry hands Pierre a heavy iron key. Pierre and Marie walk out of the brick building and into the open cobblestone courtyard. The cold wind pushes against their heavy wool clothing. They walk toward a dilapidated structure positioned against a tall stone wall. The structure consists of rough wooden planks and a sloping glass roof. Pierre pushes the iron key into the rusted lock mechanism. The metal grinds and squeaks. He turns his wrist. He pulls the heavy wooden door outward. The trapped air moves out into the courtyard. The air carries the distinct odor of wet rot, damp earth, and the faint, lingering metallic scent of dried blood. Medical students previously utilized this exact wooden enclosure to slice open and examine deceased human cadavers. Marie and Pierre step over the wooden threshold. Their leather shoes sink into the loose dirt floor. Uneven, cracked paving stones sit embedded in the mud. The vertical wooden planks forming the walls are warped from years of rain exposure. Wide gaps separate the individual boards. The wind blows directly through these vertical slits. The roof consists of overlapping rectangular glass panes set into a rusted iron grid. Many of the glass panes contain long, jagged cracks. A square section of the iron grid frames a patch of open gray sky. Rainwater drips through the cracks and falls directly onto the dirt floor, creating small, dark puddles of brown mud. The interior space holds three long wooden tables built from thick pine boards. A black cast iron coal stove sits in the corner. A narrow iron pipe extends from the top of the stove and passes through a hole in the wooden wall. The architectural design consists solely of the solid walls and roof. The dense wood traps all airborne chemical vapors inside the single room. The wooden tables sit completely exposed to the open air of the shed. The ambient air temperature inside the shed exactly matches the temperature of the air blowing across the courtyard outside. The pitchblende originates in a deep geological formation in the Joachimsthal region of the Bohemian forest. Human laborers dig deep vertical shafts into the earth. They use iron pickaxes to shatter the heavy veins of rock. They load the chunks of dark ore into wooden carts. The carts travel to a surface processing facility. Industrial workers submerge the rock in large vats of highly concentrated sulfuric acid. The acid dissolves the uranium out of the rock structure. Factories purchase the uranium to manufacture bright yellow dyes for commercial glass and ceramic plates. The remaining solid material sits at the bottom of the acid vats. The workers shovel this wet, heavy residue out of the vats. They pile the material into massive mounds on the dirt ground outside the facility. The dark brown sludge dries in the sun. It hardens into abrasive gravel and fine black powder. The Austrian government exercises legal ownership over the facility. The government classifies this specific pile of radioactive residue as discarded industrial waste. Pierre writes a letter requesting access to this waste material. Railway workers load the thick canvas sacks into wooden freight cars. A heavy, horse drawn wagon pulls into the cobblestone courtyard of the school in Paris. The iron shoes of the draftest horses strike the stones. The wooden wagon wheels creak under the massive weight of the cargo. The driver pulls the thick leather reins. The horses stop their forward movement. The driver jumps down from the wooden seat. His leather boots hit the stones. He drops the heavy wooden tailgate of the wagon. The iron hinges generate a high pitched metallic screech. Two men wearing thick canvas aprons climb into the wagon bed. They drag the heavy canvas sacks toward the edge. The coarse fabric scrapes against the rough wooden floorboards. The men push the sacks over the edge. The sacks hit the ground. The impact generates a loud, deep thud that vibrates through the cobblestones and into the soles of Marie's leather shoes. Marie stands in the courtyard. The ambient air is cold. The winter sun hangs low in the sky, casting long, dark shadows across the paving stones. She wears her heavy, dark blue wool dress. She watches the men untie the thick hemp ropes securing the tops of the sacks. The men grab the bottom corners of the fabric. They lift their arms. The dark brown and black material slides out of the sacks. The material forms a massive conical pile on the ground. The pile consists of crushed rock, fine dark powder, and jagged pieces of heavy slag. Interspersed within the brown dirt are sharp pine needles from the Bohemian forest. The pile grows in size as the men empty sack after sack. The physical mass accumulates. The height of the rock pile increases. The apex of the dark brown cone reaches a vertical height greater than the top of Marie's head. The wind blows across the courtyard. It lifts the fine black dust from the surface of the pile. The dust particles swirl through the air. Marie inhales the air. The dust coats the moisture inside her nasal passages and coats the back of her throat. She tastes the bitter, metallic flavor of the crushed minerals. She steps forward. The leather soles of her shoes crunch against the loose gravel scattered on the stones. She reaches out her right hand. She buries her fingers into the side of the mound. The rock is cold. The sharp edges of the crushed slag press into the soft skin of her fingertips. The dirt turns the skin of her hands black. The mass of the rock pile represents exactly 1,000 kilograms of solid matter. The new, highly radioactive element exists entirely inside the chemical structure of this dirt. The physical extraction of the hidden element requires applying boiling acids and extreme thermal energy to every single gram of this massive pile. Marie pulls her hand from the cold rock. She turns her body toward the open door of the wooden shed. The rusted iron coal stove sits inside the dark interior, waiting for the heavy iron cauldrons to be placed upon the heated metal. The year is 1898. Inside the wooden shed, the ambient air temperature measures 4 degrees Celsius. Wind blows through the wide vertical gaps between the warped pine wall boards. Rainwater drips from the cracked glass roof panes overhead. Drops of water fall onto the dirt floor, forming pools of dark brown mud. Marie stands beside a black cast iron coal stove. The iron radiates intense thermal energy. A heavy, wide iron cauldron sits directly on the hot metal surface. The cauldron contains 20 kilograms of crushed, dark brown pitch blende dirt and 20 liters of highly concentrated sulfuric acid. The dense mixture boils violently. Large bubbles form at the bottom, rise to the surface, and burst with thick, wet popping sounds. Plumes of white chemical vapor rise from the surface of the boiling liquid. The vapor smells sharply of sulfur, ozone, and hot metal. The acidic gas enters Marie's nasal passages. It travels down her trachea into her lungs. The delicate tissue in her throat burns. Her tear ducts secrete clear, say saline, to flush the chemical irritant from her eyes. She holds a solid iron rod. The cylindrical iron rod measures 1.5 meters in length. She grips the cold, rough metal with both hands. She pushes the heavy rod deep into the boiling sludge. She uses the muscles in her back, shoulders, and arms to pull the heavy iron through the dense, resistant chemical mixture. The metal rod scrapes against the cast iron bottom of the cauldron. The friction produces a low, grinding vibration that travels up the rod and into the bones of her arms. The scraping sound echoes against the wooden walls. She repeats this specific physical motion continuously for hours. Sweat forms on her forehead and rolls down her cheeks, mixing with the white chemical dust settling on her skin. The physical separation of the individual elements requires a strict, repetitive sequence of physical actions. She boils the pitch blende ore in the acid. She grips the heavy cast iron cauldron with thick pads of folded canvas. She lifts the cauldron. She pours the boiling liquid into a series of smaller glass beakers. She adds specific chemical salts to the beakers. The salts force specific target elements to solidify. Solid, heavy crystals form in the liquid and sink to the bottom of the glass. She pours the remaining liquid through conical paper filters. The wet, porous paper traps the solid matter. She uses a flat steel spatula to scrape the wet chemical paste off the paper. She places the paste into a clean glass beaker. She pours fresh acid over the paste. The solid paste dissolves back into a liquid state. She repeats this exact sequence of boiling, precipitating, filtering, and dissolving hundreds of times. She carries the small glass beakers to the wooden table holding the piezoelectric quartz electrometer. She measures the electrical current in the air space exactly above the glass. She identifies the specific beaker, producing the highest numerical reading on the brass scale. She retains that highly active material. She carries the remaining inactive liquid outside. She pours it onto the dirt of the courtyard. She tracks the invisible physical energy through the sequence of hundreds of glass beakers. The Earth continues its rotation. The ambient temperature drops in the winter months and rises in the summer months. The physical mass of the conical pitch blende pile in the courtyard decreases. The volume of the highly active material inside the shed decreases. Marie processes exactly 1,000 kilograms of raw dirt. From this massive volume of physical matter, she isolates exactly 1/10 of a gram of pure radium chloride. She holds a tiny glass tube containing a few specks of white salt. The mass ratio of the raw pitch blende rock to the final purified element measures exactly 10 million to 1. In July of 1898, Marie and Pierre record specific numerical measurements in their paper notebooks. The numbers confirm the presence of a new element. They write a sequence of letters naming the element polonium. They select this exact sequence of letters to represent the geographic landmass of Poland. 5 months later, in December of 1898, they isolate a second new element. They write the letters radium. They derive the specific sequence of letters from the Latin word for ray. The sun drops below the horizon of Paris. The sky turns dark. The interior of the wooden shed becomes completely black. Marie and Pierre walk across the cobblestone courtyard. Their leather shoes strike the hard stones. They open the wooden door of the shed. They stand in the dark room. They look at the flat wooden tables. The small glass dishes and thin glass tubes emit a continuous faint blue light. The light generates directly from the internal atomic structure of the radium salts. The radioactive energy excites the nitrogen molecules in the surrounding air, producing visible blue photons. The blue light illuminates the curved glass containers. The light casts weak, shifting shadows onto the rough wood of the tables. Marie and Pierre stand in the cold dirt. They watched the blue light shine in the darkness. Pierre carries a small glass vial containing the glowing radium salt. He places the glass vial inside the front pocket of his dark wool vest. He walks across the city. The radioactive energy passes entirely through the solid glass wall of the vial. The energy passes through the wool fibers of his vest and the cotton fabric of his shirt. The invisible rays strike the epidermal cells on the left side of his chest. The energy disrupts the microscopic cellular structure of his flesh. The skin turns bright red. The tissue blisters, breaks open, and peels away. The cellular damage leaves a deep, permanent physical scar on his chest. Marie handles the highly active chemical solutions daily. The radioactive liquids splash onto her hands. She grips the heavy iron rod. The skin on her fingertips dries out. The epidermal layers crack open. Deep red fissures appear around the edges of her fingernails. The nerve endings inside her fingers alter their function. The tips of her fingers become completely numb. She sits at the wooden table. She dips her steel pen into the black ink. She presses the metal nib onto the paper notebook. She writes detailed descriptions of the cracked skin, the red fissures, and the loss of physical sensation in her fingertips. The Earth completes multiple orbits around the Sun. The numerical year becomes 1903. The volume of pure radium chloride inside the shed slowly increases. The blue light in the glass tubes grows brighter. The scientific community in other geographic locations receives the printed journals detailing the isolation of the new elements. Men wearing formal wool suits sit in a large, ornately decorated room in Stockholm, Sweden. They hold pieces of paper containing the names of specific scientists. They hold solid gold medals, representing the highest level of physical science, recognition on the planet. They prepare a formal written communication addressed to the physical residence of Pierre Curie, initiating the procedure of the Nobel Prize in Physics. The calendar on the wall displays the numerical year 1903. Snow falls from the gray sky over the stone buildings of Stockholm, Sweden. The frozen water crystals accumulate on the streets. Inside a massive stone building, a group of men sit around a long mahogany table. They wear thick black wool suits and stiff white cotton collars. A wood fire burns inside a marble fireplace. The burning wood radiates thermal energy, heating the air inside the room. Sheets of heavy, textured paper rest on the flat surface of the table. The men hold wooden pens fitted with steel nibs. They dip the steel into glass pots of black ink. They press the wet metal against the paper. The ink flows onto the fibers, forming specific words. The words detail the recent physical measurements of invisible radiation. The men write the names of the individuals selected to receive the Nobel Prize in Physics. They write the sequence of letters spelling Henri Becquerel. They write the sequence of letters spelling Pierre Curie. They stop writing. The ink dries on the paper. The official document contains exactly two names. A specific male member of the Swedish committee sits at his own wooden desk. He dips his steel pen into his inkwell. He drags the wet metal across a small sheet of paper. He writes a message directly to Pierre Curie. He details the exact names currently recorded on the official award document. He folds the paper. He seals the paper inside a paper envelope using hot red wax. He exchanges metal coins for postage. A postal worker carries the envelope southward across the European continent. The worker hands the envelope to Pierre inside the laboratory in Paris. Pierre breaks the hard wax seal. He unfolds the paper. The ambient light reflects off the black ink. He reads the words. Pierre sits down at his wooden workbench. He pulls a blank sheet of paper toward his chest. He dips his pen into the ink. He writes a direct response. He explicitly states his absolute refusal to accept the solid gold medal and the associated bank draft. unless the official document includes the specific letters spelling Marie Curie. He places his paper into an envelope. He seals it. He hands it to the postal worker. The paper travels north back to Stockholm. The men in the warm room read the black ink marks made by Pierre. They pick up their steel pens. They dip the nibs into the black ink. They pull the official award document across the mahogany table. They press the metal to the paper. They write the name Marie Curie directly next to the name Pierre Curie. By the end of the year 1903, the Swedish Academy has minted and distributed approximately 20 solid gold Nobel Prize medals. Human hands received these heavy metal discs. The exact quantity of these gold medals handed to female human bodies equals zero. Marie Curie becomes the first female human to receive the physical award. The formal ceremony occurs in Stockholm in December of 1903. Marie and Pierre remain inside their apartment in Paris. Their physical bodies possess a very low level of biological energy. Their respiratory systems struggle to pull sufficient oxygen into their lungs. The skeletal muscles in their legs and arms tremble under the strain of prolonged physical exertion. Their bodies require rest. The Swedish Academy places the gold medals and the official documents inside wooden boxes and ships them to Paris at a later date. The prize includes a large paper bank draft representing a high quantity of Swedish kroner. Marie and Pierre walk across the cobblestone streets to a bank in Paris. They slide the paper draft across a polished wooden counter. A bank teller hands them heavy stacks of metal coins and French banknotes. Marie and Pierre carry the currency back to their apartment. They hand stacks of these banknotes to the local merchants and property owners who previously provided them with goods and services. The exchange finalizes their accumulated financial obligations. They hand banknotes to a young male student, compensating him for his physical labor in their laboratory. They hand a large stack of banknotes to a professional plumber. The plumber carries a heavy, white cast iron bathtub covered in smooth porcelain up the stairs to their apartment. He sets the heavy object on the wooden floorboards. He connects hollow brass pipes to the base of the tub. He solders the metal joints using a hot torch and lead wire. Hot, clean water flows out of the brass fixtures and fills the white basin. Marie and Pierre submerge their bodies in the hot water. The thermal energy transfers through their skin, warming their deep muscle tissues and bones. Industrialists wearing silk ties travel to Paris. They walk into the damp courtyard and enter the wooden shed. They ask Marie and Pierre for the specific chemical sequence required to extract pure radium from pitch-blended dirt. Marie opens her paper notebooks. She copies the exact chemical formulas and physical procedures onto new sheets of paper. She details the boiling, the filtering, and the crystallization. She hands the papers to the industrialists. The industrialists carry the papers away. They use these written instructions to construct massive brick factories. They sell the extracted radium for massive quantities of national currency. Marie and Pierre request 0 coins in exchange for the paper instructions. The Earth continues its rotation on its axis. The calendar advances to December 1904. Marie lies flat in the wooden bed inside the apartment. Her uterine muscles contract violently. She pushes a second female infant out of her birth canal. The infant takes a sharp breath of atmospheric air and vocalizes loudly. They name the child Eve. The apartment now holds 4 living human bodies. Marie leaves the apartment and walks back to the wooden shed. The physical structure remains exactly as before. The wind blows through the vertical gaps in the warped pine boards. She stands beside the hot cast iron stove. She grips the heavy iron rod with her bare hands. She pushes the metal down into the boiling chemical sludge. White vapor rises into the cold air. The radioactive dust settles onto the fabric of her heavy, dark blue wool dress. The microscopic radium particles enter her nasal passages and travel down her trachea into her lungs. The alpha particles strike the cellular walls of her internal organs. She pulls the iron rod through the dense liquid. The small glass tubes resting on the wooden tables continue to emit their steady, faint blue light. The Earth completes another full orbit. The calendar reaches the 19th day of April in the year 1906. It is a Thursday afternoon. Pierre puts on his dark wool coat. He buttons the thick fabric across his chest. He steps out of the brick building and walks onto the paved street near the Pont Neuf. Dark gray clouds release thick drops of liquid water onto the city of Paris. The water coats the rounded tops of the cobblestones. The wet stone creates a slick, low friction surface. A massive wooden wagon loaded with 6 tons of military uniforms approaches the crowded intersection from the opposite direction. Liquid water falls from the dense gray clouds covering Paris. The date is April 19, 1906. The ambient air is cool. The water droplets strike the rounded tops of the granite cobblestones, paving the Rue Dauphine near the Pont Neuf. The water accumulates in the narrow gaps between the stones, mixing with horse manure and dirt to form a thin, slick layer of dark mud. Pierre Curie walks along the street. He is 46 years old. He wears a heavy dark wool coat. The rain saturates the outer fibers of the wool, adding mass to the garment. He holds a black umbrella over his head. The rainwater hits the taut fabric of the umbrella, producing a rapid, continuous drumming sound. He walks toward a crowded intersection. Horse-drawn omnibuses and enclosed wooden carriages roll over the wet stones. The iron rims of the wagon wheels grind against the granite. A large transport wagon moves through the intersection, traveling in the opposite direction. Two massive draft horses pull the wagon. Their iron-shod hooves strike the wet cobblestones, creating loud, sharp clacks. Thick leather harnesses connect the animals to the wooden frame. The wagon bed holds exactly 6 tons of heavy wool fabric, specifically manufactured for military uniforms. The physical mass of the cargo presses down heavily on the steel axles and the four large wooden wheels. Thick iron bands encircle the outer edges of the wooden wheels. Pierre steps off the elevated edge of the pedestrian walkway onto the paved street. The flat leather sole of his left shoe presses against the wet, curved surface of a granite cobblestone. A layer of liquid water and mud separates the leather from the stone. The friction between the two surfaces drops to near zero. Gravity pulls the mass of his physical body downward. The muscles in his legs yield to the sudden acceleration. He falls backward. His heavy wool coat absorbs the initial impact against the hard stones. He slides directly into the path of the approaching wagon. The draft horses continue their forward momentum. The massive rear left wheel of the wagon rolls over the wet granite. The iron rim of the wheel makes contact with Pierre's skull. The combined weight of the heavy wooden wagon and the 6 tons of uniform fabric transfers directly through the iron rim. The mechanical pressure shatters the bone structure of his cranium. The physical trauma instantly halts the electrical signals traveling through his brain tissue. The pumping action of his heart ceases. Oxygenated blood stops flowing through his veins and arteries. His biological functions terminate completely. Red blood pools on the wet gray stones, mixing with the falling rainwater. Marie stands inside the laboratory room at the School of Industrial Physics. and chemistry. She holds a glass beaker containing a clear chemical solution. A male colleague opens the wooden door. The iron hinges squeak. The man walks across the ceramic tiles. He stops in front of Marie. He pushes air up through his vocal cords. He speaks a sequence of French words describing the mechanical event on the Rue Dauphine. Marie sets the glass beaker down on the flat wooden table. The glass bottom clicks against the wood. She turns her body. She walks out of the brick building. She walks through the rain to their apartment. The door opens. A male physician stands inside the main living area. He wears a dark suit. The physical presence of the physician confirms the transfer of information. In the evenings, Marie sits at the small wooden table inside the apartment. A brass oil lamp burns in the center, projecting yellow light onto the plaster walls. She opens a notebook bound in dark leather. She grips a steel pen. She dips the metal nib into a glass inkwell. She presses the wet steel against the thick paper. She writes letters. She directs the sequences of words to Pierre. She writes the sentences using the present tense. She details the daily actions of their children and the temperature of the air in the rooms. The ink dries on the page. She closes the leather cover. Weeks later, officials from the Sorbonne University send a formal written document to the apartment. The paper contains an offer of employment. They offer Marie the exact teaching position previously held by Pierre. She signs her name on the required paper forms. She walks into the large lecture hall at the university. Hundreds of students and professors sit on the tiered wooden benches. They wear dark wool coats and stiff white collars. The room is completely silent. Marie walks down the center aisle. Her leather shoes click against the wooden floorboards. She is the first female human to stand at the instructional podium in the history of institution. From this specific moment, the percentage of women teaching at the Sorbonnes rises from 0 to approximately 0.2%. This represents a statistical event of one. She stands behind the heavy wooden podium. She looks at the rows of faces. She opens her paper notes. She pushes air up through her trachea. She vibrates her vocal cords. She speaks the exact sequence of French words Pierre had been speaking when his final lecture ended. She dictates mathematical equations regarding electrical currents and magnetic fields. She picks up a piece of white chalk and presses it against the black slate board. The chalk scrapes against the slate, leaving a trail of white dust. Inside the apartment, the demographic composition changes. Pierre's father, a tall man with white hair, moves his physical belongings into the rooms. He sits in the wooden chairs and watches the two children. Irene is 8 years old. Eve is 1 year old. They consume food. Their bones lengthen and their cellular mass increases. Marie spends the daylight hours inside the laboratory. The physical work demands total focus. She places the heavy pitch blende residue into the glass beakers. She pours the corrosive sulfuric acid over the dark dirt. Liquid boils and produces white chemical vapor. She filters the solid crystals from the liquid. She continues the exact repetitive sequence of physical movements required to extract the elements. She concentrates entirely on separating the chemical compounds. The calendar pages turn. The Earth continues its orbit around the Sun. The year advances to 1910. The volume of isolated radioactive material in the glass tubes increases. The procedures systematically strip away the surrounding chemical salts. The final physical state of pure, metallic radium sits trapped inside the clear glass, ready to be shipped across the European continent to a committee of men waiting in Sweden. The calendar on the plaster wall displays the numerical year 1910. Inside the laboratory in Paris, Marie Curie stands at the flat wooden workbench. She holds a small clear glass tube between her thumb and index finger. Inside the cylindrical tube sits a tiny, solid piece of metal. The metal is silver white. The surface reflects the ambient light of the room. This physical object is pure, metallic radium. Marie has completely separated the radium atoms from the chloride salts. The extraction process required 12 continuous years of physical labor. She boiled thousands of liters of sulfuric acid, filtered heavy brown sludge through porous paper, and crystallized the chemical salts. The pure metal inside the glass continuously emits radioactive energy. The invisible rays pass through the thin glass wall and strike the skin of her fingers. In November of 1911, a paper envelope arrives from Stockholm, Sweden. Black ink on the heavy textured paper details a decision made by the men of the Swedish Academy of Sciences. They have assigned a second solid gold Nobel Prize medal to Marie Curie. The ink specifies the discipline of chemistry. She is the first human to receive two of these specific gold medals. Over the next 115 years, exactly four other human beings will accumulate two Nobel medals. Marie Curie remains the sole human to hold the medals in two different scientific disciplines. Days before the arrival of the envelope from Sweden, heavy printing presses operate inside a brick building in Paris. Large iron gears turn. Thick leather belts transfer kinetic energy from steam engines to the metal rollers. Black, viscous ink coats the heavy lead type plates. The plates press against continuous rolls of cheap newsprint. The mechanical action transfers words onto the paper. The room smells strongly of petroleum solvents, wet paper, and hot machine oil. The printed words consist of private letters written by Marie Curie and Paul Langevin. Paul Langevin is a male physicist. He wears dark wool suits. He previously sat on the wooden benches in Pierre Curie's classroom. He is legally bound by a civil marriage contract to a female spouse. Prior to the mechanical printing, Paul Langvin's spouse handed silver coins to a man. This man walked to a specific brick apartment building in Paris. Marie and Paul used a room in this building to occupy the same physical space. The hired man manipulated the metal tumblers of the iron lock on the door. He pushed the door open. He entered the empty room. He pulled open a wooden desk drawer. He extracted the folded pieces of paper containing the handwritten letters. He carried the papers out of the building. The specific sequences of words on those papers transferred to the metal plates of the printing presses. Newspaper vendors stand on the wet cobblestone streets of Paris. They exchange the printed papers for small copper coins. Residents of Paris read the black ink marks. A large group of these residents walks to the street outside Marie's stone house. The hard leather soles of their shoes scrape against the paving stones. Hundreds of physical bodies press together, forming a dense crowd. They push large volumes of air through their vocal cords. They project loud, harsh, phonetic sounds toward the glass windows of the house. They yell words detailing her geographic origin in Poland. They yell words categorizing her as Jewish. Marie stands inside her house. She hears the overlapping acoustic waves vibrating the glass window panes. She pulls a leather suitcase from a closet. She folds thick wool dresses and places them inside the leather container. She holds the physical hands of her two daughters, Irene and Eve. They walk out the back door of the building. They step into a horse drawn carriage. They travel away from the high density city center. They enter a stone house owned by a colleague in the rural countryside. They sit inside the quiet rooms, isolated from the acoustic vibrations of the crowd. A second paper letter arrives from the Swedish Academy. The ink marks on this page outline a request. The men request she abstain from traveling to the formal ceremony in Stockholm. The men write words indicating their desire to avoid the physical presence of the newspaper readers and their loud vocalizations at the event. Marie places her dresses into a wooden trunk. She boards a train at the Paris railway station. Coal burns inside the iron firebox of the locomotive. The expanding steam turns the massive steel wheels. The train travels north across the European continent. She arrives in Stockholm. The ambient air temperature is below the freezing point of water. White snow covers the dirt and the stone streets. Inside her body, microscopic bacteria multiply within the tissue of her renal system. Her kidneys swell with fluid. The internal biological infection raises her core body temperature to 39 degrees Celsius. Sweat forms on the skin of her forehead and neck. The skeletal muscles in her back and legs contract and ache. She wears a dark, heavy formal dress. She walks into the brightly lit ceremony hall. Hundreds of people sit in wooden chairs. She walks across the floor to the front of the room. She extends her hands. She accepts the heavy, solid gold medal from the King of Sweden. She walks to a long wooden table covered with white linen cloth. She sits on a wooden chair. The king sits nearby. They consume cooked meats and root vegetables using silver forks and knives. Marie's kidneys continue to inflame. The infected tissue presses against the surrounding organs in her abdomen. Her physical energy levels deplete rapidly. She maintains an upright posture in the wooden chair until the meal concludes. The Earth completes its orbit and the calendar advances to December 1911. Marie travels back to Paris. She enters her apartment. She walks to her bedroom. She lies down on the flat mattress of her wooden bed. Her physical body ceases its daily vertical movements. The kidney infection peaks. The flow of oxygenated blood through her vascular system slows. Her cellular energy reserve is empty. She remains in a horizontal position on the mattress. She spends the majority of the year 1912 inside this specific bedroom and inside rural, convalescent homes. She rests under heavy wool blankets. Her respiratory rate remains shallow. She consumes hot beef broths and liquid water. The physical mass of her frame shrinks as her body consumes its own fat and muscle tissue to fight the bacterial infection. Outside the quiet bedroom, the Earth continues its orbit toward the year 1914. Men in heavy industrial metal factories across the European continent pour liquid lead into iron molds to cast millions of conical bullets. They shape cylindrical brass casings to hold explosive chemical powders. Industrial engineers bolt heavy steel plates together to construct massive artillery cannons. In August, regiments of German soldiers put on thick gray wool uniforms. They pick up long steel rifles. They begin walking their physical bodies westward across the dirt roads and agricultural fields of Europe, moving steadily toward the geographic borders of France. The year is 1914. A new building stands on the Rue Pierre Curie in Paris. The exterior walls consist of stacked red bricks and white mortar. The interior rooms smell of fresh plaster, floor wax, and brass polish. Marie Curie places her glass beakers and heavy measuring instruments onto the new flat wooden tables. She establishes the physical layout of the Radium Institute. 300 kilometers to the east, hundreds of thousands of men wearing gray wool uniforms walk across dirt roads and agricultural fields. They carry heavy steel rifles. They load metal artillery cannons with explosive chemical powders. They ignite the powders. The rapid expansion of hot gases forces heavy iron shells through the air. The shells impact the dirt and detonate. The pressure waves vibrate the air and shatter the structural integrity of buildings, trees, and human bodies. Marie walks into her laboratory room. She lifts a heavy container constructed from solid elemental lead. The interior space of the container holds exactly 1 gram of pure radium chloride. The high physical density of the lead metal blocks the alpha and beta particles emitted by the radioactive salt, trapping the energy inside the thick walls. The box requires significant physical exertion to lift. Marie grips a leather handle attached to the metal. She carries the ladder box through the streets of Paris to a railway station. She boards a train traveling south. The heavy iron wheels roll over the steel tracks. She transports the physical mass to the city of Bordeaux. She places the lead container inside the thick steel vault of a bank. She leaves the building. She boards a train traveling north and returns to the brick laboratory in Paris. In the muddy fields near the trench lines, medical personnel construct temporary enclosures using heavy green canvas. Inside the canvas tents, surgeons stand over wooden tables. The air smells of copper blood, pungent iodine, and human sweat. Injured men lie flat on the wooden boards. Pieces of lead bullets and jagged steel shrapnel rest deep inside their muscle tissue and bone cavities. The surgeons grip cold steel scalpels. They push the sharp metal blades into the human flesh. They push their bare fingers into the open wounds. They rely entirely on tactile friction to locate the metal objects hidden inside the wet muscle fiber. Marie walks into the enclosed sitting rooms of wealthy Paris residents. She asks the occupants for physical vehicles. Individuals hand her the metal keys to their private automobiles. The vehicles consist of heavy steel frames, internal combustion engines, and hard rubber tires over wooden spokes. She asks factory owners for electrical generators and glass vacuum tubes. Industrial workers use metal wrenches to bolt heavy dynamos directly to the engines of the cars. They secure glass X ray tubes, wooden boxes of unexposed photographic glass plates, and darkroom chemical trays into the rear compartments of the vehicles. In late October of 1914, Marie sits on the leather seat of the first completed mobile unit. She operates the mechanical controls. She pushes her leather shoe against the metal clutch pedal. She shifts the steel transmission gears using a wooden lever. She turns the circular steering wheel with her hands. The combustion engine burns liquid petroleum. Thick gray smoke and the smell of unburned hydrocarbons exit the metal exhaust pipe. The solid rubber tires roll over the uneven dirt roads, transporting the heavy equipment toward the military front lines. The dirt roads contain deep ruts and sharp stones. The rubber tires puncture and tear. Marie stops the vehicle. She steps out into the cold mud. She positions a heavy steel jack under the metal axle. She presses a long iron bar downward, lifting the side of the car into the air. She uses a metal wrench to remove the threaded lug nuts. She removes the punctured tire and lifts an intact heavy wheel onto the metal studs. She opens the hinged metal hood of the car. She wipes thick black grease and accumulated road dust from the brass carburetor using a cotton rag. Her 17-year-old daughter, Irene, sits in the passenger seat. Irene wears a heavy wool coat. The mother and daughter travel together across the cold landscape. The vehicle stops outside a canvas medical tent. The internal combustion engine continues to run. A thick insulated copper wire transfers electrical current from the engine dynamo to the X-ray machine. Two men carry a wounded soldier on a canvas stretcher. They place his body on a wooden table. Marie positions a large bulbous glass vacuum tube directly over his chest. She places a flat photographic glass plate in a wooden light-proof cassette beneath his back. She throws a metal switch. High voltage electricity surges through the tungsten targets inside the glass tube. Invisible X-ray radiation projects downward. The rays pass easily through the soft muscle and fat cells of the man. The dense calcium of his skeletal bones and the solid lead of the embedded bullet block the radiation from hitting the plate below. Marie carries the wooden cassette into a dark space. She extracts the glass plate. She submerges the glass in a tray of liquid developer chemicals. The air smells sharply of acetic acid. The silver halide molecules on the glass react to the chemical bath. She pulls the wet glass out of the liquid. She holds the plate in front of a white light source. The glass displays a bright white silhouette of the bone structure. A distinct, completely opaque white shape shows the exact physical location of the lead bullet, resting against a fractured rib. The surgeon looks at the glass. He pushes his steel scalpel into the exact designated location. He uses metal forceps to extract the lead object. Factory workers assemble 19 additional mobile X-ray vehicles. They install 200 stationary X-ray units inside existing stone and brick hospital buildings. Over the duration of the military conflict, exactly 1 million wounded human bodies pass through the invisible radiation beams of these machines. This total physical mass of treated humans roughly equals the entire living population of the modern city of Brussels, passing over the wooden tables. Marie stands inside a lecture hall in Paris. 150 young women sit on the wooden benches. Marise demonstrates the physical operation of the glass vacuum tubes and the electrical generators. The women memorize the sequence of switches and the development times for the chemical baths. They travel to the canvas tents. They position the glass tubes over the soldiers. They throw the metal switches. Invisible X-ray radiation scatters off the wooden tables, the metal tools, and the human bodies. The scattered radiation strikes the skin of the female operators. The high-energy waves penetrate the tissue of Marie and the young women, silently altering the microscopic cellular structures deep inside their bodies. The military conflict eventually ceases. The men stop firing the heavy artillery shells. Marie returns to the brick building on Rue Pierre Curie. She resumes her daily physical labor of extracting elements from dark dirt. Beyond the walls of her laboratory, industrial manufacturers observe the continuous thermal energy and the blue light emitted by the radium. They utilize heavy machinery to extract the element in massive quantities. They place the radioactive metal into commercial factories. They mix the glowing powder with consumer goods, selling the invisible radiation to the civilian population in glass bottles and painted watch dials. Glass bottles line the wooden shelves of a pharmacy in the United States. The year is 1920. The air inside the store smells of dried peppermint leaves, carbolic soap, and floor wax. Customers walk across the white hexagonal ceramic floor tiles. They place paper banknotes and silver coins onto a polished oak counter. They receive commercial products containing specific quantities of radium salts. Factory machines the radioactive powder into white cosmetic face creams and thick pastes for brushing teeth. Workers pour the powder into large vats of liquid chocolate, cool the mixture, and wrap the solid brown rectangles in paper labels, reading radium chocolate. Bakers knead the radioactive salts into wet flour dough and bake loaves of bread. Pharmacists press the powder into solid suppositories and bath salts. Consumers rub the white creams onto the skin of their faces. They swallow the solid food products. The physical extraction of radium requires massive industrial labor. The raw pitchblende dirt travels in heavy canvas sacks on iron freight trains. Men boil the dirt in vats of sulfuric acid. The isolation of the pure metal sets a specific exchange rate for the commercial market. The acquisition of exactly 1 gram of pure radium requires the transfer of 100,000 United States paper dollars. The physical paper currency required to match this value weighs several kilograms. A man named Eben Byers sits in a leather chair inside a large stone house in the city of Pittsburgh. He wears a tailored wool suit. He holds a small glass bottle labeled Radithor. The bottle contains distilled liquid water mixed with radium and mesothorium isotopes. He unscrews the metal cap. He raises the glass rim to his lips. He tilts the bottle backward. He swallows the clear liquid. The fluid travels down his esophagus and into his stomach. The radioactive atoms enter his bloodstream. He repeats this exact physical sequence up to 3 times every single day. He continues this daily consumption for a duration of 36 months. The radium atoms possess chemical properties nearly identical to the element calcium. The blood vessels carry the radium directly to the skeletal structure of his body. The human body deposits the radioactive heavy metal into the hard bone matrix. Inside Aben Byers' skeletal system, the radium continuously emits alpha particles. The high-energy particles tear through the surrounding living bone cells. The solid calcium structure of his upper and lower jawbone degrades into a soft, porous mass. The bone fragments and detaches from his skull. His red blood cell count drops. In the year 1932, his heart muscle stops contracting. A mechanical printing press transfers black ink onto coarse paper for the Wall Street Journal, forming a sequence of letters stating the radium water functioned properly until his physical jaw detached. In the geographic regions of New Jersey, Illinois, and Connecticut, large brick factories operate during the daylight hours. Inside a factory in New Jersey, rows of long wooden tables stretch across a wide floor. The air smells of chemical thinners, brass polish, and pine dust. Hundreds of young women sit on hard wooden chairs. The natural light from tall glass windows illuminates their workspaces. Small ceramic bowls rest on the flat tables in front of them. The bowls contain a specialized liquid paint. The paint consists of a chemical adhesive, zinc sulfide crystals, and radium salts. The radioactive energy emitted by the radium continuously strikes the zinc sulfide crystals inside the bowls. The physical collision produces a steady, pale green-blue light. The women hold thin wooden paintbrushes. The brushes contain soft camel hair bristles, attached to the wood with a small metal band. The painted numbers on the metal watch dials measure only millimeters in height. The women require a highly precise point on the brush to apply the paint to the metal surface. A female worker holds the wooden handle of the brush. She raises the tool to her face. She parts her lips and places the camel hair bristles into her mouth. Her wet lips and tongue press against the bristles, pulling them into a sharp, fine point. She removes the brush. She dips the pointed tip into the glowing green-blue paint. She transfers the paint to the metal watch dial. She paints a single number. The bristles separate and lose their sharp shape. She raises the brush to her mouth. She licks the bristles again. The liquid paint transfers directly onto her tongue and the soft tissue of the roof of her mouth. She swallows the mixture of human saliva and radioactive salts. A single worker completes the painted numbers on 200 metal watch dials during one daily shift. She places the radioactive brush into her mouth thousands of times before the sun sets. The physical accumulation of radium inside her digestive tract is massive. The radioactive material travels into her bloodstream and lodges permanently inside her skeleton. The alpha particles bombard the living tissue inside her bones from a distance of 0 millimeters. The microscopic cellular damage compounds daily. The hard enamel and dentin of her teeth loosen. The teeth detach from her gums and fall out of her mouth onto the wooden table. The structural integrity of her jawbone collapses. The long bones in her legs fracture spontaneously under the normal weight of her own body while she walks across a room. The biological damage halts the function of her internal organs. Her physical body expires before she reaches her 30th year of life. 4,000 kilometers to the east, Marie Curie sits at a wooden desk inside the Brick Radium Institute in Paris. The air in her office smells of ozone, carbolic acid, and old paper. She holds pieces of printed paper describing the physical decay of the factory workers and the consumers of the radioactive water in America. She reads the black ink letters. The material destroying the jawbones of the young women originates directly from the exact physical extraction process she developed inside the wooden shed. She sets the paper flat on the desk. She rubs her own hands together. The skin on her fingertips is hard, cracked, and completely numb to physical touch. A dense, opaque protein cloud begins to form inside the clear crystalline lenses of her own eyes, slowly blocking the ambient light of the room from reaching her retinas and reducing her visual field. The calendar indicates the early years of the 1920s. Marie Curie sits at a large oak desk inside the Radium Institute in Paris. The room smells of ozone, carbolic acid, and floor wax. Sunlight travels through the tall glass window and illuminates the flat wooden surface of the desk. Marie looks down at the black ink marks on the coarse paper of her notebooks. Inside her eyeballs, the clear biological lenses composed of water and proteins undergo a physical change. The proteins denature and clump together, forming opaque white clusters. These dense clusters physically block the incoming photons of light from passing send through her pupils and striking her retinas. Her visual field becomes blurred and dark. She contracts the skeletal muscles around her eyes, narrowing her eyelids into a tight squint to focus the limited light onto her optic nerve. A continuous, high pitched acoustic frequency vibrates inside her head. The sound originates entirely within her own auditory nerves. Her cardiovascular system pumps blood at a decreasing pressure. The warm red blood struggles to reach the capillary beds at the far ends of her limbs. The skin of her hands and feet remains cold to the touch, regardless of the ambient room temperature. The epidermal layer on her fingertips features deep, dry cracks. The damaged nerve endings inside her fingers send zero electrical signals to her brain. She presses her bare fingertips against the sharp, hard edge of the wooden desk. She registers zero physical pressure. She travels to a sterile medical facility. She lies flat on a padded operating table. A surgeon stands over her face. The surgeon holds a sharp steel scalpel. He slices through the thin, clear tissue of her cornea. He extracts the clouded, opaque protein lenses entirely from her eyeballs. The incisions heal over several weeks. She returns to the laboratory wearing heavy metal frames over her ears. Thick, curved glass lenses sit inside the metal frames. The thick glass bends the incoming light rays, forcing the photons to converge precisely on the back of her eyes. Her daily physical sequence involves walking across the ceramic tiles of the laboratory. She pulls open a heavy wooden drawer. A small glass vial rests inside the dark space. The radium salts inside the vial emit a steady, faint blue light. She grips the cold glass with her numb, calloused fingers. She lifts the vial. She places the glass container directly into the front pocket of her dark wool dress. She walks through the corridors of the brick building. The radioactive alpha and beta particles penetrate the solid glass wall of the vial. The particles travel through the woven wool fibers of her dress. The high energy particles enter her epidermal tissue and strike the cells of her internal organs. She walks back to her desk. She places her bare hands on her paper notebooks. Microscopic particles of radioactive dust transfer from the creases of her skin directly into the porous paper fibers. These exact paper notebooks currently rest inside a basement storage room at the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. The air in the room is climate controlled and completely still. The notebooks sit inside rectangular boxes constructed from solid elemental lead. The radium 226 atoms embedded inside the paper fibers continue to decay. A modern Geiger counter placed near the open pages records a rapid, continuous sequence of loud, audible clicks. The level of ionizing radiation emitted by the dry paper exactly matches the physical energy projected by a functioning, powered dental X ray machine. Radium 226 possesses an atomic half life of approximately 1,600. Earth orbits around the Sun. The atoms inside the paper will continue to fire high energy particles into the surrounding air for another 15 centuries. Marie stands behind wooden podiums in public lecture halls. She pushes air over her vocal cords to address the seated crowds. She speaks specific sequences of French words. She attributes her extreme physical fatigue to her advancing chronological age. She attributes the cellular decay in her bone marrow to the long hours she spends standing on hard floors and lifting heavy iron cauldrons. She details the specific protective measures she implements in the laboratory. She describes the solid lead shields and thick glasscom screens. She positions between her physical body and the glowing chemical solutions. Individuals sign paper documents establishing the Curie Foundation in the year 1921. The documents allocate large volumes of metal coins and paper banknotes to fund ongoing cancer research inside the Radium Institute. In May of 1921, Marie packs a leather suitcase. She boards a massive ocean liner. The ship consists of thousands of riveted steel plates. Heavy black coal burns inside the massive iron boilers in the hull. The expanding steam turns giant bronze propellers. The ship pushes through the salt water of the Atlantic Ocean. The air smells of wet salt and burning coal dust. She arrives in the United States of America. She walks into a reception room in Washington, D.C. The ambient air is warm. Warren G. Harding, the male occupying the position of United States President, stands on the floor wearing a dark wool suit. He holds a small casket constructed from dark mahogany wood. Thick elemental lead lines the interior of the box. Inside the lead chamber sits exactly 1 gram of pure radium. The women residing in the United States gathered exactly 100,000 paper dollars and exchanged the currency for this specific piece of heavy metal. The president extends his arms. He hands the heavy box to Marie. She grips the polished wood with her numb fingers. She carries the box onto the steel ocean liner for the return voyage. She sits in a wooden chair inside her private cabin. The mahogany box rests on the wooden floorboards directly beside her leather shoes. She maintains continuous visual contact with the physical object as the ship travels eastward across the dark water. She arrives back in Paris. She carries the heavy mahogany box down the stone steps into the basement of the Radium Institute. She places the lead lined casket inside a thick steel vault. She rotates the heavy metal dial, locking the steel door mechanism. She climbs the stone stairs. She walks into her main laboratory room. She sits at her wooden desk. At the adjacent flat wooden workbench, a young woman wearing a dark dress stands on the ceramic tiles. This woman holds a glass beaker in her left hand and a thin steel rod in her right hand. The woman dips the steel rod into a chemical solution, initiating her own exact sequence of physical measurements. The woman standing on the ceramic floor tiles of the Radium Institute is Irene Curie. The calendar displays the numerical year 1926. She is 29 years old. She wears a heavy black wool dress with long sleeves. The air inside the room smells of acetic acid, warm electrical copper coils, and floor wax. She holds a thin, hollow glass pipette in her right hand. She squeezes a red rubber bulb attached to the top opening of the glass tube. The physical pressure change inside the tube draws exactly 10 milliliters of a liquid polonium solution upward into the glass cylinder. She moves her arm over the flat surface of a heavy oak table. She slowly releases the pressure on the rubber bulb. The liquid drops onto a flat, white ceramic dish. The liquid spreads across the smooth ceramic surface. A man stands beside her on the ceramic tiles. His name is Frederic Joliot. He wears a gray cotton laboratory coat over a dark wool suit. He is an engineer. He watches the radioactive liquid hit the ceramic dish. He holds a piece of coarse paper and a graphite pencil. He presses the sharp graphite tip against the paper, leaving dark carbon marks to record the numerical measurements of the radioactive decay. Their hard leather shoes scrape against the floor tiles as they move around the heavy wooden tables. Later in the year 1926, Irene and Frederic stand together inside a municipal building in Paris. They hold steel pens. They apply wet black ink to a paper document, executing a civil marriage contract. They exchange metal rings and establish a shared living quarters in the city. The daily operations inside the brick building on the Rue Pierre Curie follow a strict physical pattern. In the early morning hours, sunlight passes through the tall glass windows on the eastern wall. The light illuminates the dust particles suspended in the air. Marie sits at the large oak desk in the director's office. She presses a steel pen to paper, signing order forms for laboratory equipment and glass chemical beakers. Down the hallway, behind a closed heavy wooden door, Irene and Frederic occupy a separate laboratory room. They connect thick copper wires to heavy, acid filled glass batteries. They place thin sheets of silver aluminum foil inside clear glass vacuum tubes. They use heavy iron pumps to extract the air molecules from the tubes. They place a sample of polonium near the aluminum. The polonium emits alpha particles. The invisible particles travel through the vacuum and strike the aluminum atoms, altering the dense atomic nuclei of the metal. Four specific human bodies constitute this immediate family unit: Marie, Pierre, Irene, and Frederic. The men operating the Swedish Academy of Sciences ultimately transfer exactly 5 solid gold Nobel Prize medals to these four individuals across 2 generations. The accumulation of 5 heavy gold medals within a single biological family represents a precise statistical density. The historical record of scientific awards contains 0 other instances of this exact concentration of metal metals. The Earth continues its orbit. The calendar advances to the year 1929. Marie packs heavy wool clothing into a leather trunk. The brass latches click shut. She walks onto the wooden deck of a massive steel ocean liner. The ship consists of thousands of overlapping steel plates, secured by heavy iron.
Rivet.
Black coal burns inside massive iron boilers deep in the hull. The expanding steam forces massive steel pistons up and down, turning giant bronze propellers. The ship pushes through the saltwater of the Atlantic Ocean. The air smells of wet salt, crushed foam, and burning coal dust. The mechanical vibration of the engines travels up through the steel deck plates and into the soles of her shoes. She arrives in the United States of America. She travels to a large stone building in Washington, D.C. A male human named Herbert Hoover, the current president of the United States, stands in a brightly lit room. He hands Marie a heavy, square wooden box. Thick elemental lead plates line the interior walls of the box. Inside the lid chamber sits exactly 1 gram of pure metallic radium. A large group of women residing in the United States transferred exactly 100,000 paper dollars to chemical factories to purchase this is exact physical mass of radioactive metal. Marie grips the heavy box. She carries the dense physical weight back to the steel ship. She transports the radium eastward, across the ocean water. She marks the final geographic destination for this specific radioactive material as the city of Warsaw. The date is May 29, 1932. A new building stands on Wawelska Street in Warsaw, Poland. The exterior walls consist of light colored bricks and tall glass windows. Marie stands on the loose dirt ground near the front entrance. The ambient air is cool. She is 64 years old. The individual hair follicles on her scalp no longer produce melanin, leaving the strands of hair entirely white. She wears thick, heavy glass lenses set in circular metal frames over her eyes to correct the severe visual distortion caused by the physical extraction of her clouded crystalline lenses. The skeletal muscles in her arms and legs tremble continuously. She grips a long wooden shovel handle. The metal blade of the shovel pushes into the dark brown soil. The steel scrapes against small subterranean rocks. She lifts a mass of damp dirt. The dirt smells of crushed earthworms and wet plant roots. She drops the dirt over the roots of a small young tree planted in a hole in the ground. Her sister Bronisława stands beside her on the grass. Bronisława occupies the physical role of the first director of this new medical facility. Marie climbs up a set of wooden steps to a raised platform. She stands behind a wooden podium. A crowd of people stands on the dirt and grass below. Marie pushes air up through her trachea. The air moves over her vocal cords, generating acoustic waves. She shapes the sounds with her lips and tongue. For the first time in decades, the phonetic sounds she projects at a public event consist entirely of the Polish language. The sound waves vibrate across the open air and strike the eardrums of the crowd. Marie steps down from the wooden platform. Her leather shoes move slowly across the ground. She boards a train car. The locomotive engine burns black coal and boils liquid water. The expanding steam pushes the steel pistons. The heavy iron wheels turn against the steel tracks, transporting her physical body westward back to the city of Paris. She arrives at her apartment building. She places her hands on the wooden railing. She walks up the wooden stairs. The muscles in her legs burn from the accumulation of lactic acid. Her respiratory rate is rapid and shallow. Her lungs struggle to pull enough oxygen into her bloodstream. Deep inside the hollow cavities of her skeletal system, the bone marrow ceases to produce red and white blood cells at the necessary biological volume. She enters her bedroom and lowers her body onto the flat, soft mattress. Her internal organs enter a continuous, irreversible sequence of biological failure as the Earth continues its orbit toward the year 1934 and her physical relocation to a medical sanatorium located in the high altitude of the French Alps. Cold, thin air pushes against the glass window panes of the San Selmo's sanatorium in the French Alps. The atmospheric pressure at this high elevation is extremely low. White snow covers the sharp granite peaks outside the window. The bright sunlight reflects off the snow, sending intense white light into a small room on an upper floor. The room smells of sharp pine needles, rubbing alcohol, and clean cotton sheets. Marie Curie lies flat on her back on a narrow wooden bed. She is 66 years old. Her physical frame is extremely thin. Her skin is pale white and cool to the touch. Male physicians wear white cotton coats. They stand beside the wooden bed. They hold cylindrical wooden stethoscopes to Marie's chest. They listen to the flow of air moving in and out of her lungs. 56 years earlier, the Mycobacterium tuberculosis bacteria consumed the lung tissue of her mother. The physicians observed Marie's shallow breathing and low physical energy. They assign the exact same bacterial diagnosis to her physical condition. They prescribe isolation in the high altitude, low temperature environment of the mountain sanatorium. They transport her body onto a train. The steel wheels carry her upward into the Alps. The diagnosis changes based on blood samples drawn from her veins. Sharp steel needles puncture the skin of her arm. The physicians extract the liquid blood into glass tubes. The blood lacks the dark red color of healthy human circulation. The liquid is pale and watery. Deep inside the hollow cavities of Marie's femur, pelvis, and sternum, the biological tissue known as bone marrow undergoes massive cellular failure. The marrow ceases the production of erythrocytes, the red blood cells required to transport oxygen to the muscles and organs. Near space. The marrow ceases the production of leukocytes, the white blood cells required to destroy invading bacteria. The specific physical condition is aplastic anemia. The medical textbooks, yet resting on the wooden shelves in the year 1934, attribute aplastic anemia strictly to inherited genetic traits or specific chemical solvents. The physicians observe the failing bone marrow. They record the cellular decay on paper charts. They base their diagnosis entirely on the visible drop in blood cell counts, the direct biological mechanism connecting decades of exposure to radioactive isotopes, and the total cessation of blood cell production requires another generation of accumulated physical measurements to enter the medical literature. The physicians document the symptoms while the radioactive particles continue to bombard the interior walls of her bones. Marie's core body temperature rises. Sweat forms on her forehead and drips onto the white cotton pillowcase. The skeletal muscles in her hands tremble continuously. Her daughter Eve sits on a wooden chair beside the bed. Eve wears a dark wool dress. She holds sheets of paper delivered by the postal service from the Brick Laboratory in Paris. Eve pushes air up her trachea. She shapes the air into French words. She reads the numerical data and the chemical measurements recorded by the laboratory workers aloud. Marie turns her head on the pillow. She listens to the sequences of numbers detailing the ongoing isolation of the radioactive elements. The Earth continues its rotation. The calendar marks the 4th day of July in the year 1934. The sun rises over the jagged stone peaks. Inside the quiet room, the cellular oxygen levels in Marie's brain tissue drop below the minimum threshold required to sustain electrical activity. Her heart muscle slows its rhythmic pumping. The flow of blood through her arteries halts. Her lungs remain completely still inside her chest cavity. Her biological functions terminate completely. Ave sits in the wooden chair and watches the physical body on the mattress. Men transport the physical remains down the mountain. They place the body inside a coffin, constructed from thick wooden planks. They attach heavy, flat plates of solid elemental lead to the interior walls of the wooden box. Marie's skeletal structure contains a specific accumulation of radium 226 atoms deposited over 36 years of physical contact with the chemical solutions. The bones emit continuous ionizing radiation. The dense lead plates absorb the high energy particles, trapping the radiation inside the enclosed space. The men carry the heavy lead lined coffin to a cemetery in the town of Sceaux, located south of Paris. They use steel shovels to dig a rectangular hole in the dirt. The dirt smells of damp clay and crushed plant roots. Smalls crunch under the leather shoes of her family members and a small group of laboratory colleagues. The men lower the heavy box into the hole. They place it directly adjacent to the decaying wooden coffin containing the skeletal remains of Pierre Curie. They shovel the brown dirt over the wood. The Earth completes 61 orbits around the Sun. The calendar reaches the year 1995. Government workers arrive at the cemetery in Cesseau. They use steel shovels and heavy motorized excavators to remove the dirt from the rectangular hole. They wrap thick hemp ropes around the lead lined coffins of Marie and Pierre. They pull the heavy boxes out of the ground. They load the wooden boxes onto motorized transport vehicles. The vehicles travel over paved roads to the center of Paris. They stop in front of a massive stone building. The building features a high dome, tall granite columns, and heavy bronze doors. This structure is the Pantheon. Men carry the coffins through the bronze doors. The interior space features vast marble floors and towering stone walls. The air is cold and smells of old dust and polished stone. Hard leather shoes echo loudly across the wide, empty spaces. The architectural structure functions as a permanent storage facility for the physical remains of individuals recognized by the French government for extreme intellectual and physical labor. The crypts below the marble floor hold the skeletal remains of approximately 80 human bodies. Prior to the arrival of the transport vehicles, in 1995, the demographic composition of the human remains placed in this specific stone building based entirely on their own individual labor output consisted exclusively of male bodies. The workers lower Marie Curie's lead lined coffin into a dark stone crypt. The inclusion of her physical mass alters the demographic mathematics of the building. Her physical placement inside the Pantheon raises the ratio of female bodies recognized for their own merits to exactly 1.3% over the 200-year history of the structure. The heavy stone lid slides into place over the crypt. The radium atoms embedded inside her bone marrow continue to decay in the absolute darkness, releasing continuous bursts of alpha particles into the solid lead walls. Above ground, distributed across the city of Paris, the physical objects she manipulated with her numb, cracked fingers remain inside quiet rooms and locked vaults. Her dark blue wool dresses, her wooden desk chairs, the glass chemical beakers, and the leather bound paper notebooks she filled with black ink sit undisturbed. Microscopic grains of the exact same radioactive elements rest deep inside the porous fibers of the paper pages, emitting the exact same invisible energy into the surrounding air. Smooth gray concrete forms the walls, floor, and ceiling of subterranean storage room inside the Bibliothèque Nationale de France in Paris. Thick steel doors with heavy rubber seals isolate the enclosed space from the surrounding corridors. Mechanical metal vents circulate the air. The ventilation system maintains a constant ambient temperature of 20 degrees Celsius and a specific low percentage of humidity. The moving air smells of dry paper, floor epoxy, and the sharp, metallic scent of ozone. Heavy rectangular boxes rest on flat steel shelves, bolted to the concrete walls. The boxes consist entirely of solid elemental lead. The high physical density of the lead metal absorbs high energy particles. A human worker walks down the corridor outside the room. Thick rubber soles squeak against the smooth floor. The worker stops at a steel table. A white paper form attached to a metal clipboard rests on the table. The black ink printed on the paper details the specific physical risks of cellular damage resulting from exposure to ionizing radiation. The worker grips a plastic pen. The worker presses the metal ballpoint to the paper. The metal ball rolls over the paper fibers, depositing a trail of thick black ink to form a signature. The ink dries. The worker opens a clear plastic bag. The worker pulls out a thick white suit, constructed from dense synthetic fibers. The worker steps into the suit and pulls the fabric up over their legs and torso. A metal zipper closes the front of the suit. The worker pulls thick yellow rubber gloves over their hands. They wrap gray adhesive tapes around the seams where the rubber overlaps the white fabric. The worker places the clear plastic mask over their face. The rigid plastic presses tightly against the skin of their forehead and cheeks. Thick elastic bands secure the mask neck the back of their head. The worker pulls the heavy steel door open. The metal hinges glide smoothly. The worker steps into the concrete room. The worker approaches the steel shelf. The worker places their thick yellow rubber gloves on the lid of one heavy lead box. The massive physical weight of the lead requires the worker to engage the skeletal muscles in their back and shoulders. The worker pulls upward. The lid lifts. Inside the dark interior of the lead box rests a bound book. The cover consists of dark brown leather. The leather is dry and physically cracked along the spine. The pages consist of thick, coarse paper. The edges of the paper show dark brown stains from spilled chemical solutions. The paper fibers hold specific sequences of black iron gall ink. Microscopic particles of radium 226 rest embedded directly between the cellulose fibers of the paper pages. 3 decades earlier, Marie Curie's bare, calloused fingertips pressed these exact radioactive particles into the paper while she held her steel pen inside the wooden shed. The radium atoms undergo a continuous physical process of radioactive decay. The dense atomic nucleus of a radium atom ejects an alpha particle. The alpha particle consists of two protons and two neutrons tightly bound together. The particle travels outward at high velocity. The particle strikes the nitrogen and oxygen molecules in the air inside the box. The particle strikes the yellow rubber gloves of the worker. A handheld measuring device called a Geiger counter rests on the steel shelf next to the lead box. The radiation enters the gas-filled metal tube of the device. The high-energy particles strip electrons from the gas molecules. The resulting electrical current triggers a small metal speaker inside the plastic casing. The speaker produces a sharp, loud acoustic click. The clicks occur in rapid, overlapping succession. The thousands of individual clicks merge into a continuous, harsh, static sound. The physical energy emitted by the dry paper pages exactly equals the radiation produced by a powered, heavy metal dental X ray machine actively exposing a photographic plate. Radium 226 possesses an atomic half life of 1,600 Earth orbits around the Sun. The atoms inside the paper will continue this exact physical ejection of alpha particles for another 9,500 years. The physical radiation levels emitting from the leather bound book will finally match the low ambient background radiation of the surrounding dirt and stone in approximately the calendar year 11,500. Other physical objects exist in similar states of continuous high energy emission. In a different building in Paris, the Curie Museum holds the wooden furniture from the original brick laboratory. A wooden chair with a seat constructed from woven plant cane sits behind a thick glass barrier. Marie Curie placed the physical weight of her body onto this specific woven cane. The porous wood fibers hold trace amounts of radium dust. Heavy dark blue wool dresses hang on wooden hangers inside a sealed cabinet. The woven wool fibers emit alpha particles into the dark space. A printed paper cookbook containing instructions for roasting animal meats and boiling root vegetables rests on a display shelf. The pages contain dried grease stains and microscopic radium particles. The metal speaker of the Geiger counter produces the exact same rapid sequence of loud clicks when placed near the woven cane, the heavy wool dresses, and the paper cookbook. Inside the same museum, a heavy square box sits behind a thick pane of leaded glass. The box contains the exact gram of pure radium metal handed to Marie Curie by the President of the United States in 1921. The heavy metal sits inside the locked enclosure. The metal generates its own thermal energy, keeping the surrounding air physically warm. The metal emits a steady, faint blue light. The radioactive energy excites the surrounding air molecules, producing the visible blue photons. The physical decay continues at the exact numerical rate. Marie Curie calculated using the brass electrometer. Back inside the subterranean room of the National Library, the worker in the white synthetic suit looks down at the open notebook. The thick yellow rubber gloves pinch the corner of a single coarse paper page. The worker turns the page. The dry paper makes a stiff, rustling sound. The overhead light illuminates the black ink. The ink forms a specific handwritten date at the top of the page. The sequence of and letters and designates a Tuesday afternoon in the year 1901. Columns of numbers run vertically down the center of the paper, recording the electrical currents measured in the cold air of the wooden shed. The black ink is completely dry. The physical paper hums with continuous radioactive energy. The alpha particles shoot upward from the graphite and ink marks. This specific physical energy, discharging from the dry paper on the lead line shelf, constitutes the identical foundational mechanism now driving massive industrial turbines and complex medical irradiation machines, currently operating in cities across the globe. Thick cylindrical structures of reinforced concrete stand on the edge of a wide, flowing river. Inside the concrete containment dome, long metallic rods submerged in deep pools of clear water contain compressed pellets of uranium. The heavy uranium atoms undergo continuous nuclear fission. The dense atomic nuclei split into smaller fragments, releasing massive quantities of kinetic and thermal energy. The thermal energy transfers to the surrounding liquid water. The water reaches the boiling point and converts into high-pressure steam. The steam pushes against the curved steel blades of massive industrial turbines. The turbines spin, rotating heavy copper coils inside strong magnetic fields. This physical motion pushes electrons through thick copper wires suspended on tall steel towers. The electrical current travels across geographic distances. The electrons enter glass bulbs inside residential houses, heating tungsten filaments until they emit white light. Inside a brightly lit room in a modern medical hospital, the floors consist of smooth, seamless white linoleum. The air smells of isopropyl alcohol and sterile cotton bandages. A human patient lies flat on a mechanized carbon fiber table. Above the patient, a heavy machine rotates on a circular metal gantry. The machine contains a linear particle accelerator. A focused beam of high energy X rays projects downward from the metal housing. The invisible radiation penetrates the skin, fat, and muscle tissue of the patient. The radiation strikes a specific, localized mass of rapidly dividing cells deep inside the body. The high energy photons sever the molecular bonds of the deoxyribonucleic acid inside the cancer cells. The cellular division process halts. The mass of cells shrinks. Medical professionals direct these specific radiation beams into the bodies of roughly half of all human patients diagnosed with anomalous cellular growth. Inside another diagnostic room in the hospital, a human patient consumes a small volume of a liquid glucose solution containing a radioactive isotope of fluorine. The patient slides into the center of a massive white toroidal machine. The radioactive fluorine travels through the bloodstream and concentrates inside tissues exhibiting high rates of cellular metabolism. The unstable fluorine atoms decay, emitting positrons. The positrons collide with electrons in the surrounding tissue. The physical collision annihilates both particles, emitting two gamma ray photons traveling in exactly opposite directions. A ring of solid crystal detectors inside the machine captures the gamma rays. A computer processes the timing of the photon strikes. A monitor displays a high contrast, three-dimensional visual map of the internal cellular activity, highlighting the exact geometric locations of rapidly dividing tumors. Inside residential structures, small white plastic discs attach to flat plaster ceilings. A tiny piece of the radioactive element, americium 241, sits inside a metal chamber within the plastic casing. The element continuously emits alpha particles, ionizing the oxygen and nitrogen molecules in the small air gap. This ionization creates a steady, microscopic electrical current. Airborne particles of carbon and ash from a burning object drift upward and enter the metal chamber. The smoke particles physically block the alpha particles. The electrical current drops. The internal circuitry reacts to the drop in voltage and triggers a piezoelectric metal disc to vibrate rapidly, producing a loud, high pitched acoustic alarm. In archaeological laboratories, researchers place fragments of old wooden tools and woven plant fibers into mass spectrometers. They count the remaining atoms of carbon 14. They calculate the precise rate of radioactive decay to measure the exact chronological age of the physical objects. Every nuclear reactor dome, every linear accelerator in an oncology ward, every positron emission tomography scanner, and every plastic smoke detector relies entirely on the physical behaviors of unstable atomic nuclei. The initial identification and measurement of these behaviors occurred inside a wooden shed with a leaking glass roof where one human female stirred boiling acid with an iron rod. Physicists and engineers write mathematical equations on whiteboards using dry erase markers. They quantify the exact intensity of radioactive sources. They utilize a specific standardized unit of measurement. They write the letters C and I. The unit is the Curie. One Curie equals exactly 37 billion atomic disintegrations occurring within a single second of time. This massive numerical quantity of physical decay exactly matches the baseline activity of one single gram of radium 226. The entire global system of radiation measurement scales outward from the exact physical mass of the white salt. Marie Curie, isolated from the Bohemian dirt. The physical structure of the Radium Institute on Rue Pierre Curie in Paris maintains its location. The brick walls support multiple upper floors. Inside the modern laboratories, hundreds of biological researchers and medical doctors wear white cotton coats. They look through the glass lenses of electron microscopes. They measure the physical effects of radiation on living cellular cultures. The facility operates under the title Institute Curie. It functions as a primary center for the physical treatment of tumors in Europe. In the city of Warsaw, the light colored brick building on Wawelska Street expands into a massive complex of concrete and glass. Patients walk through the wide glass doors. The building operates as the Maria Skłodowska-Curie National Research Institute of Oncology. It covers the largest geographic area of any cancer treatment center in Poland. Physicists and engineers write mathematical equations detailing the deliberate splitting of heavy elements. In the year 1945, an airplane constructed from aluminum alloy flies at a high altitude. The mechanical bomb bay doors open. A heavy metal cylinder drops from the aircraft. The cylinder falls through the atmosphere. Inside the metal casing, conventional chemical explosives detonate, driving two masses of radioactive uranium 235 together at extreme velocity. The heavy atoms achieve critical mass. The nuclei split simultaneously. The physical matter converts directly into an immense volume of pure energy. The reaction generates a blinding flash of electromagnetic radiation, a sphere of expanding plasma exceeding the surface temperature of the sun, and a massive pressure wave. The shockwave crushes concrete buildings, melts iron bridges, and instantly incinerates organic tissue across a radius of several kilometers. The physical extraction of the dark brown dirt in the Paris courtyard isolated the specific mechanism that currently powers the electrical grids, illuminates the hospital screens, and possesses the physical capacity to vaporize entire concrete cities. The calendar on the wall of the San Selmo's sanatorium marks the date July 4, 1934. A single window remains propped open. Cool air from the high altitude mountain peaks of the French Alps flows into the room. The air carries the faint scent of snow, pine needles, and wet granite. Marie Curie lies on the narrow wooden bed. The white cotton sheets press against the skeletal frame of her body. Her skin is pale and cool. Her breathing is slow and shallow. She pulls air into her lungs, allows the oxygen to exchange with the carbon dioxide in her bloodstream, and expels the air in a steady rhythm. The muscles in her arms, legs, and torso remain limp. She rests her head on the flat cotton pillow. The white fabric shows no movement except for the slight rise and fall of her chest. In the entryway of the sanatorium, located on the ground floor, a small mahogany box sits on a wooden table. The interior of the box contains a thick lining of elemental lead. Inside the lead cavity, a small glass vial rests on a velvet cushion. The vial contains a granular white powder of radium chloride. The atoms inside the powder continuously eject alpha particles into the glass and the lead. The radioactive decay generates measurable thermal energy. The glass vial maintains a temperature slightly warmer than the surrounding air. The internal atomic process continues at the exact numerical rate established by Marie Curie in the wooden shed in Paris 3 decades earlier. Biological system shuts down. The bone marrow inside her femur, pelvis, and sternum remains inactive. The production of erythrocytes and leukocytes remains at zero. Her heart muscle slows its contractions. The blood pressure in her arteries drops. The flow of oxygenated blood to the neurons in her brain ceases. The chemical and electrical signals stop. The internal body temperature drops toward the ambient temperature of the room. The physical entity of Marie Curie reaches a state of biological equilibrium with the surrounding environment of the mountain cabin. Her physical contact with radioactive materials defines the sequence of her terminal illness. The high energy particles emitted by the radium salts passed through her skin and struck the cells of her internal organs continuously for 36 years. The particles caused massive damage to the cellular DNA inside her bone marrow. The cumulative physical trauma resulted in aplastic anemia. Her daughter, Irene Joliot-Curie, also experienced this specific cellular decay. Irene continued the physical labor of measuring radioactive elements in the laboratories of the Radium Institute. In the year 1956, Irene's bone marrow ceased the production of blood cells. The physical cause was leukemia, a direct consequence of the continuous ionization of her bone marrow tissue during her professional research. The radium consumption of the factory workers and the industrial consumers in the United States caused additional physical casualties. The radioactive salts deposited inside the skeletal structures of the watch dial painters emitted high energy particles that destroyed the bone, tissue in their jaws, and long bones. The skeletal integrity of Eben Byers collapsed as the radium atoms replaced the calcium in his mandible. The number of human bodies experiencing tissue decay and organ failure due to the handling, ingestion, and proximity to radioactive materials founded by Marie Curie remains uncounted. The medical application of the radioactive rays provides a different numerical result. The hospital wards across the globe utilize linear particle accelerators and high energy radiation beams to treat the anomalous cell growth in human patients. Each day, medical professionals position the bodies of patients on mechanized tables. They focus the radiation beams on localized masses of cells. The high energy photons sever the molecular bonds of the DNA inside the tumor tissue, halting the cellular division. The percentage of cancer patients globally who receive this form of radiation therapy as a component of their treatment protocol is 50%. The estimated volume of human lives extended or saved by this specific clinical application reaches into the hundreds of millions. The ratio of human lives shortened by the radioactive particles compared to the number of lives extended by the clinical use of those same particles remains a complex calculation. The numerical result of this ratio equals millions saved for every single life shortened. Marie Curie never signed a patent for the radium extraction process. She never accepted monetary payment from the industrial manufacturers who constructed the massive factories to process the dark, pitch blend dirt. She never retired from the physical labor at the laboratory bench. She manipulated the glass beakers, stirred the chemical cauldrons, and recorded the numerical measurements until the physical structure of her body reached the point of terminal cellular failure. The window in the sanatorium room remains propped open. A light breeze moves the white cotton curtains. The curtains sway in the air, creating a soft, rhythmic sound against the wooden window frame. The sunlight illuminates the dust particles floating in the air. The physical room remains silent. Outside, the granite peaks of the French Alps reach toward the sky. The radioactive elements in the mountains continue their decay. The radium atoms in the lead lined box in the entryway emit their continuous faint blue light in the darkness of the wooden house. The physical legacy of their experiments, conducted in the leaking wooden shed bed, persists in the electrical grids, the hospital wards, and the silent radioactive decay occurring inside the paper pages of the notebooks stored in the basement of the library in Paris. Of the 20th century realities of the 20th century remains anchored to the measurements made by the woman who now lies completely still on the wooden bed in the mountain air.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. If you've already fallen asleep, I completely understand. Anyway, see you in the next video.